A place where honor, once lost, was like a spilled cup of water on parched earth, gone and almost impossible to gather back. Where the sunset, more often than not, just smelled faintly, unromantically, of fish, because that's what the poor ate, if they ate at all. And you, dear Ronin, you are now decidedly terrifyingly poor. Let's peel back the layers of silk and ceremony, shall we? Let's get our hands dirty. The weight of 1,000 unblinking eyes. Masterlessness in a world obsessed with belonging. So, your master is gone. Poof, vanished from the world, or at least from your world. What does this actually mean for you, our freshly minted Ronin, beyond the immediate, gut-wrenching panic of an empty rice stack? First, understand this. 17th century Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate was a society obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with order, hierarchy, and belonging. Think of it as the most intricate, high-stakes game of Jenga ever conceived. Every single person, from the emperor, divine but largely powerless, down to the eater, the outcasts who handled death and leather, had a specific place, a role, a set of obligations. The samurai, the shy, were at the top of the practical pecking order, just below the distant nobility. Their function? To rule, to fight, to be the moral and martial backbone of the nation. And the defining characteristic of a samurai: loyalty to a lord, service. Now you've lost that. You're a block pulled from the Jenga tower, and everyone is staring, waiting for the whole damn thing to collapse because of you. You are, in a very real sense, a social aberration. The Bukushohato, those laws for warrior households, periodically issued by the shogunate, were crystal clear. Samurai were to be loyal, practice martial arts and frugality, and avoid frivolous pursuits. But the entire framework was predicated on having a master to be loyal to. Without a lord, you're no longer officially part of the ruling class, even if you still carry the two swords that scream samurai to the world. You've become a floater, a wave man. And waves, as any sailor knows, can be unpredictable, destructive. The authorities, from the local Machibugyo, town magistrate, to the shogun's own spies, viewed Ronin with deep suspicion. Why? Because a large body of unemployed, skilled warriors was, historically speaking, a recipe for rebellion, banditry, and general mayhem. Think about it. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of men trained to kill, suddenly with no income and a massive chip on their shoulder. It's not exactly conducive to a peaceful, orderly society, is it? The shogunate had, in fact, inadvertently created a Ronin problem. After the bloody Sengoku Jidai, Warring States period, ended and Tokugawa Ieyasu unified Japan in 1603, peace, ironically, became a samurai's worst enemy. Daimyo domains were consolidated, reduced, or abolished. Armies were downsized. Suddenly, legions of loyal retainers found themselves thanked for their service and shown the door. Your situation isn't unique, it's a societal pressure cooker. So, what does this mean for your day-to-day? It means every interaction is freighted with unspoken tension. When you walk down the street, commoners, the farmers, no. Artisans, ko. And merchants, sho, who technically rank below you, will still bow. Old habits die hard, and those swords are a potent reminder of who you were. But their bows might be a little too quick, their eyes darting away a little too readily. They smell the desperation on you, the lack of a powerful name backing you up. You're a samurai, yes, but a broken one. A stray dog that might still bite. Other, still employed samurai. They're a mixed bag. Some might feel a pang of sympathy, a there but for the grace of Hachiman go-I sentiment. After all, any of them could find themselves in your straw sandals, but many more will see you as a failure, a disgrace to the warrior class. A man unable to secure his position, or worse, whose master was himself a failure. They might sneer, subtly or overtly. They might avoid you, fearing your bad luck, or your potential for troublemaking is contagious. You're a walking, talking reminder of instability, and nobody in a rigid hierarchy likes those. And what of your family, you might ask? If you had one, their fate is now intimately tied to yours. A wife and children would be plunged into the same abyss of uncertainty and poverty. Your shame becomes their shame, your hunger their hunger. Often, samurai families would be absorbed by relatives if possible, but a Ronin's family, they were often as adrift as he was. The pressure to provide, To maintain some semblance of dignity for them would be crushing. It's enough to drive a man to, well, we'll get to the desperate measures later. The psychological toll is immense. You were trained to see yourself as a pillar of society. Now you feel like a parasite. The term Ronin itself carried a heavy stigma. Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Alright, settle in. Maybe dim the lights a bit if you're feeling theatrical. Perhaps even turn on a fan, not for the cool breeze, but to imagine the faint, ever-present scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and something vaguely fishy. We're going on a journey, you and I, not to a land of anime super warriors or exquisitely choreographed movie duels, but to a place far grittier, far more precarious. We're heading to 17th century Japan, the early Edo period, a time of supposed peace under the Tokugawa shogunate. A peace bought with iron and maintained with a ruthless grip. And you're not just any visitor. Imagine this. You were born into a world that sings of plum blossoms in spring, of snow-capped Fuji, of poetry whispered under a pale moon. A world meticulously ordered, where every bow, every breath, every flick of a sleeve was codified, judged. You were raised on a diet of discipline so severe it would make a modern drill sergeant weep. Taught from the moment you could walk that honor, jiri was more precious, more vital than the very air you breathed. Your sword? The katana and wakizashi, the daisho, they weren't just weapons. They were extensions of your soul, the sacred symbols of your caste, the samurai. To serve your master, your daimyo, was not merely a job. It was your entire existence, your reason for being. To serve was to breathe. Now hold that image. Cherish it, because it's about to shatter. Imagine your master is dead. Perhaps he fell in one of the last lingering skirmishes that solidified the Tokugawa grip. Maybe he chose the crimson path of seppuku after some political misstep, a whisper campaign, a lost battle of wits in the viper's nest of courtly intrigue. Or perhaps, even more ignominiously, his domain was simply confiscated, absorbed by a more powerful lord, his household dissolved like morning mist. The why hardly matters to your empty belly. The result is the same. You are now a Ronin, a wave man, masterless, rudderless, adrift on the brutal currents of this new era. No master means no stipend of rice, that precious currency of life. No pay means no warm sake to dull the chill, no new silk for your worn kimono, no oil for your lamp. No purpose? That's the wound that festers deepest. You, a warrior bred for loyalty and action, are now a loose thread in the meticulously woven tapestry of Japanese society. A dangerous anomaly. An embarrassment. Forget the stoic, wandering heroes of later fiction, the yojimbos with their cool stares and cunning plans, always landing on their feet or finding a noble cause. That's the romantic gloss, the cinematic sheen. You, my friend, are sitting on the splintered, piss-stained doorstep of a dilapidated, paper-thin house in some forgotten alley of Kyoto, or perhaps the burgeoning, chaotic sprawl of Edo. The morning sun, if it bothers to pierce the smog of cooking fires and the city's general miasma, feels less like a blessing and more like an interrogator's lamp. In your chipped bowl, a few grains of cold rice porridge, thin and watery, cling together for dear life, much like you. And the big decision of the day, the one that churns your gut more than the meager breakfast, it's not about avenging your fallen lord or righting some terrible injustice. No, it's far more pathetic. You're weighing whether to sell your wakizashi, your companion sword, the shorter blade that speaks of your samurai status almost as loudly as the katana. The very thought is a physical pain, a betrayal of everything you are. But rice costs money. Shelter, even this hovel, demands its pittance. The alternative? You find yourself idly wondering if you could make a go of it writing those wistful little poems. Haiku, perhaps. After all, poets, they seem to attract fewer suspicious glances, fewer pointed questions from the local constabulary, and they probably get to eat more regularly than you do. So, do you really want to know what life was like? Not the life of the perfumed courtiers in the imperial palace, nor the powerful daimyo in their fortified castles, not even the bustling merchant growing fat on the new piece. We're diving headfirst into the existence of a man who was once at the apex of the social order, a man of the sword, now clinging to its ragged edge. A country where a single misspoken word, a glance held too long, a failure to show the proper deference, wasn't just social suicide. It could earn you a swift, brutal lesson from a samurai's dagger, or worse, an official invitation to disembowel yourself to preserve a sliver of your family's already tarnished name. Welcome, then, to the unvarnished reality of Edo-ro Japan. It wasn't a cool, rebellious moniker. It was a label of misfortune, often of disgrace. You are, in essence, a ghost with a job application, haunting the periphery of a world that no longer has a place for you. And every morning, when you wake up, that weight settles on your chest before you even open your eyes. The weight of 1,000 unblinking, judging eyes. The clang of an empty bowl, finding a roof, scrounging for rice. Let's get practical. Philosophical despair is all well and good for poetry, but it doesn't fill an empty stomach or keep the rain off your head. You're a ronin. You have no fief, no stipend. How, exactly, do you survive? First, shelter. Your former life probably involved reasonably comfortable quarters within your master's estate, or at least a designated samurai residence. Clean tatami mats, perhaps a small garden servants. Forget all that. That's a distant, fragrant memory. Now, you're looking at the bottom rung of the housing ladder, and believe me, it's rickety. If you're lucky, you might find a tiny, rented room in the crowded backstreets of Kyoto or Edo. Thick a space barely large enough for your bedroll, if you still have one that hasn't been sold, perhaps a small charcoal brazier for warmth and cooking, if you can afford charcoal, and if you have anything to cook. These rooms would be in the poorer sections, cheek by jowl with laborers, struggling artisans, and other unfortunates. Paper walls, thin as a whisper, offer no privacy. You'll hear every cough, every argument, every desperate prayer from your neighbors. The smells? A delightful potpourri of unwashed bodies, cheat cooking, refuse, and despair. This isn't rustic charm, this is grinding poverty. And how do you pay for even this hovel? Good question. We'll get to the bleak job market shortly. For now, let's assume you had some meager savings, or you've already started selling off your possessions. A prized tea bowl. Gone. A scroll of calligraphy from a famous master. Sold for a pittance to a merchant who knows you're desperate. Your spare kimono, the one for formal occasions, now adorning the back of someone with better prospects. If a rented room is beyond your means, things get significantly more grim. You might find temporary shelter in a dilapidated temple, one of the poorer ones that might tolerate a down-on-his-luck warrior in exchange for a vague promise of protection or a few odd jobs. Some ronin, particularly those in groups, might even occupy abandoned buildings, becoming squatters. This, of course, is risky. It attracts the attention of the authorities, and territorial disputes with other desperate groups could turn bloody. And then there's the lowest point, homelessness. Sleeping under bridges in doorways, huddled in the shadow of a wealthy merchant's sturdy wall. Exposed to the elements, the diseases, the casual cruelty of a city that has little patience for vagrants, even vagrants who carry swords. Can you imagine it? You, a man trained in the subtle arts of the tea ceremony, now trying to find a dry spot to avoid the seasonal rains, your stomach aching with a familiar, gnawing emptiness. The indignity would be a constant, bitter companion. Now food. The lifeblood. Rice. Samurai were paid in koku, a unit of rice supposedly enough to feed one man for a year. Your stipend vanished with your master. So, how do you get your daily grains? Begging is an option, though one that would sear the soul of any self-respecting samurai. To lower yourself to the level of a common mendicant, unthinkable. Yet, hunger is a powerful persuader. Some ronin, cloaking their faces in shame with a wide-brimmed kasa hat, might do just that, perhaps offering a mournful tune on a shakuhachi flute if they had the skill, a practice known as kamuso. A priest of nothingness, begging for alms. The irony wouldn't be lost on you. More likely, you'll try to find the absolute cheapest food available. Street stalls selling bowls of watery gruel, perhaps with a few scraps of pickled vegetable. A grilled sardine, its oily scent clinging to you for hours, the sunset smelling like fish indeed. If you're near a fishing village or a river, you might try your hand at fishing, though even that requires a hook and line, or the skill to improvise. foraging for edible plants in the outskirts of the city. Possible, but hardly a sustainable source of nutrition, and it puts you further into the realm of the vagrant. The gnawing hunger. That's something the romantic tales often skip. It's not just a dramatic device, it's a constant, debilitating reality. It saps your strength, clouds your judgment, makes you irritable and weak. How can you maintain the discipline of Bushido, the way of the warrior, when your body is screaming for sustenance? How can you practice your sword forms when your muscles tremble from lack of food? And always, the calculation. What else can I sell? Each possession jettisoned is another piece of your identity, your past, flaking away. The cold rice porridge mentioned in our opening, that's a luxury some days. Some days, it's just the cold. The clang of an empty bowl isn't just a sound, it's the soundtrack to your new life. A life lived on the precipice, where every sunrise brings a fresh wave of anxiety about the most basic of human needs. It's a long, hard fall from the honorable halls of your master's castle, isn't it? The soul's price. The agony of the daisho. Alright, let's talk about the elephants in the room. Or rather, the finely crafted steel companions strapped to your hip. Your daisho, the matched pair of swords, the katana, and the wakizashi. These aren't just tools of your former trade, like a carpenter's hammer or a fisherman's net. Oh no, these are so much more. They are, quite literally, the soul of the samurai, the embodiment of your honor, your status, your very identity. To a samurai, the daisho was a sacred trust. The blades were often ancestral, passed down through generations, each whispering tales of valor, of duty, of battles fought and honor upheld. They were to be cared for meticulously, cleaned with fine rice paper, powdered with ochiko, oiled with choji oil. The fittings, the tsuba, guard. The menuki, hilt ornaments. The fuchi and kashira, collar and pommel, were often works of art in themselves, reflecting the owner's taste and lineage. To be seen without your swords, if you were of the samurai class, was unthinkable. It was like being naked in public, but worse, it was a declaration of your utter worthlessness. Now, you're a ronin. Your soul is feeling decidedly unduffed, much like your stomach. And those beautiful, deadly symbols of your former life. They represent one of the few remaining assets you possess that might actually be worth something. Something that could buy you rice for a week, maybe even a month. Shelter from the biting winter wind. Perhaps even a new, less conspicuous kimono to replace the increasingly tattered silks that scream failed samurai. Herein lies the terrible dilemma, a daily torment. Do you sell one? Or, gods forbid, both? Let's consider the wakizashi first, the shorter companion sword. It's often the one you're contemplating selling as you choke down that cold porridge. Why the wakizashi? Well, it's valuable, but the katana, the long sword, is the true heart of your warrior identity. To part with the katana is almost unimaginable, a final admission of defeat, a severing of your very essence. The wakizashi, while still a vital part of the daisho and a symbol of status, might seem marginally more expendable if starvation is licking at your heels. But even selling the wakizashi is a profound act of self-diminishment. It's like cutting off a piece of your own spirit. Imagine walking into a pawn shop, or, more likely, approaching a shifty-looking dealer in some back alley, because respectable establishments might ask too many awkward questions. You, a man who once commanded respect with a glance, now haggling over the price of your heritage, your pride. The dealer, smelling your desperation like a shark smells blood in the water, will offer you a fraction of its true worth. He knows you have no choice. You'll feel his greasy eyes appraising not just the sword, but you, the fallen warrior. The humiliation would be a fresh, raw wound. And what happens after you sell it? You walk away with a few coins, a temporary reprieve from hunger, but you're fundamentally changed. You're now a samurai with only one sword, an immediate visible sign to the world of your diminished status, your desperation. Other samurai will notice. Commoners might not consciously register the difference, but the aura of completeness, of proper samurai bearing, is fractured. Then there's the upkeep of the swords you still possess. These are not stainless steel, my friend. They are high-carbon steel, folded countless times, masterpieces of the swordsmith's art, and they rust. Oh, how they rust if neglected. You need oil, powder, cleaning tools. These things cost money. Money you don't have. So you watch, helpless, as a fine patina of neglect begins to creep across the polished surface of your soul. Each speck of rust is a tiny accusation. And what about their purpose? You were trained to use these blades. Your skill with them was your primary worth. Now, drawing your sword in anger, even in self-defense, is an incredibly risky proposition. If you injure or kill someone, especially another samurai, even a ronin, or, heaven forbid, a commoner under the protection of a local authority, you're inviting swift and brutal retribution. Without a master to plead your case, to vouch for your actions, you're on your own. Justice in Edo, Japan was not a nuanced affair, especially for a masterless man. An execution, probably a particularly unpleasant one, would be the likely outcome. So, your swords become a terrible paradox. They are your identity, but also a dangerous liability. They are your last link to honor, but the temptation to sell them for survival is a constant, gnawing devil on your shoulder. They are tools of deadly skill, but using that skill could sign your death warrant. Some ronin, in their desperation, might even resort to tsujijuri, crossroads killing, testing a new sword, or an old one, for that matter, on a random, defenseless passerby, often at night. This was a heinous crime, a perversion of the samurai code, born of utter desperation or sociopathy. It was also a swift way to get yourself hunted down and executed like a rabid dog. You wouldn't do that, would you? You still cling to some shred of honor, don't you? But the thought might flicker, unbidden, in the darkest, hungriest corners of your mind. The weight of the steel at your hip becomes heavier each day. It's not just the physical weight, it's the weight of your past, your failures, your impossible choices. Each morning, you look at your daisho and they look back, silent, judging. And you have to decide, once again, how much your soul is worth in cold, hard rice. It's an agony that the gleaming museum displays of samurai swords will never ever convey. The hustle of the hopeless. The ronin's job fair, spoiler, it's grim. So, you've resisted the siren song of selling your precious katana for now. You've found a leaky roof over your head, and your stomach is making noises that could curdle sake. The stark reality hits you with the force of a bokken blow to the ribs. You need a job. Or, more accurately, you need cane money. But what in the name of the 7 lucky gods is a highly trained, socially awkward killing machine supposed to do in a society that's largely at peace and deeply suspicious of him? Welcome to the ronin's job fair. Spoiler alert. The pickings are slim, and most of them come with a hefty side order of humiliation or mortal peril. First, let's be clear, your resume is problematic. Skills: expert swordsmanship, unwavering loyalty to a now deceased employer, impeccable battlefield discipline, proficient in ritual suicide. Not exactly what the local rice merchant is looking for in a stock boy, is it? The very skills that defined you are now, in many ways, your biggest handicap in the civilian job market. What were the traditional avenues for a samurai without a lord? Seeking a new master. This is the ideal, the dream. To find another daimyo willing to take you on, to restore your stipend, your status, your purpose. In reality, incredibly difficult. Most lords already had their full complement of retainers. Taking on a ronin was a risk. Who was this man? Why did his previous master let him go, or die, leaving him masterless? Was he troublesome? Unlucky? Incompetent? You'd need connections, recommendations, and a hell of a lot of luck. You might spend months, even years, traveling from domain to domain, presenting yourself, bowing, hoping, only to be met with polite refusals or outright suspicion. It was a deeply demoralizing process. Imagine the countless fruitless journeys, the dwindling hope with each closed gate. Bodyguard work. This was a more common, if less prestigious option. Wealthy merchants, increasingly prosperous in this era of peace and burgeoning trade, sometimes needed protection. Their growing wealth could attract bandits, extortionists, or resentful, impoverished samurai. So, they might hire ronin as yojimbo bodyguards. The pay? Better than starving, but a pittance compared to a true samurai stipend. The humiliation? Palpable. You, a warrior of noble lineage, now serving a chonin, a townsman, a merchant, someone you were traditionally taught to look down upon. You'd be guarding his shop, his warehouse, his person, perhaps even his pampered wife on her shopping trips. Swallowing your pride would become a daily exercise, and some merchants could be arrogant, demanding, treating their Ronin hirelings like particularly fierce guard dogs. Still, it was work. It was rice. Instructor in a dojo. If you had genuine, demonstrable skill in a particular sword school, Ryu, you might try to open a small dojo or teach at an existing one. This was more respectable, certainly. You'd be passing on the martial traditions, but the competition could be fierce. Established schools with famous masters would draw most of the students, usually the sons of other samurai or wealthy commoners. A lone Ronin, with no reputation beyond his own claims, would struggle to attract pupils, and teaching spoiled rich kids who were more interested in boasting than in serious training. That could be its own special kind of hell. No, young Kenji, you hold the shinai like this, not like you're trying to swat a particularly annoying fly. Manual labor. Unthinkable. Almost. For a samurai to engage in manual labor, the kind of work done by farmers or artisans, was a profound disgrace. It was a violation of the strict social hierarchy. Yet, when starvation loomed, when children were crying from hunger, some Ronin, in the deepest secrecy and shame, might resort to it. Working as a day laborer on a construction site, hauling goods in the market, anything to earn a few coins, always terrified of being recognized. This was the ultimate social death. The darker paths. And then there were the less savory options, the ones that whispered seductively when honor seemed like an unaffordable luxury. Enforcer for criminal gangs. The Yakuza were starting to coalesce in the burgeoning cities. These criminal organizations always had a need for muscle, for men skilled in violence who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. A desperate Ronin, with his swords and his fighting prowess, could be a valuable asset. The pay might be good, the sake might flow freely. But you'd be selling your skills to the lowest bidders, enforcing gambling debts, intimidating honest citizens, engaging in turf wars. You'd become the very thing you, as a samurai, were supposed to protect society from. Banditry. Some Ronin, either individually or in gangs, turned to outright banditry. Preying on travelers, raiding isolated villages. This was a swift descent into criminality, a complete abandonment of Bushido. The authorities hunted bandits mercilessly, and capture meant a gruesome execution. But for some, the allure of quick gain, or perhaps a twisted sense of rebellion against the society that had rejected them, was too strong. Mercenary work. While large-scale wars were over, minor skirmishes, domain disputes, or the need for special operations sometimes arose. A daimyo might secretly hire a band of Ronin for a particularly dirty job he didn't want his own retainers officially involved in. High risk, potentially high reward, but morally dubious and always precarious. You were expendable. So you wander the streets, a walking, talking paradox. Overqualified for menial work, underqualified by lack of connections or current status for noble service. Each closed door, each dismissive glance, chips away at your resolve. The poetry idea might start to look more appealing, not for the income, but for the simple dignity of creating something, anything, in a world that seems intent on unmaking you. You might find yourself lingering near the notice boards where occasional jobs are posted, usually for laborers or watchmen. Would you dare? Could you? Or perhaps you hear whispers of a merchant in the Jian district of Kyoto looking for discreet protection. Your stomach rumbles. Your hand instinctively goes to the hilt of your sword. The hustle is real. The choices almost universally suck. And the ghosts of your ancestors are watching, their disappointment a cold wind at your back. The city's embrace, the city's snare, navigating the urban labyrinth. So, you're in the city, let's say Kyoto, the ancient imperial capital, a city of refined culture, countless temples, and a sprawling, often squalid population. Or perhaps Edo, the brash, booming new seat of Tokugawa power, a raw, energetic metropolis bursting at the seams. What's it like to navigate this urban labyrinth as a Ronin, a man simultaneously conspicuous and invisible? First, the sheer sensory overload. If you came from a quieter, more rural domain, the city is an assault on the senses. The noise, the clatter of wooden clogs, gida on packed earth or stone, the shouts of vendors hawking everything from fresh fish to dubious miracle cures, the laughter and arguments spilling from tea houses and sake shops, the rhythmic chanting of priests, the the distant thrum of a temple drum. It's a cacophony that never quite ceases, a constant hum of human activity. Then the smells. Oh, the smells of a pre-industrial, densely packed city. Wood smoke is a given, hanging heavy in the air, especially in the mornings and evenings. The aroma of cooking food, soy sauce, grilling fish, steaming rice, pungent pickles, mingles with less appetizing scents. Open drains carrying wastewater and refuse, the animal smells from livery stables or markets selling live chickens and ducks, the faint but persistent odor of unwashed humanity in the poorer quarters. Remember that sunset smells like fish. It's not just a metaphor, it's often a literal olfactory backdrop to your existence. Visually, it's a maze of wooden buildings, mostly 1 or 2 stories high, crammed together along narrow streets and winding alleyways. The grand avenues might be impressive, lined with the imposing facades of wealthy merchant houses or samurai residences. But you, our Ronin friend, are more likely to be skulking through the backstreets, the Rojura, where the buildings are shabbier, the paths unpaved and muddy after rain, and the shadows deeper. These are the places where the city's underbelly thrives, and where you, unfortunately, might feel more at home, or at least less scrutinized. How do you, a man accustomed to a certain degree of deference, move through this world? Warily, very warily. You still wear your daisho. This immediately marks you. In the more prosperous areas, people might give you a wide berth, a mixture of respect and fear. But here's the kicker. As a Ronin, you lack the visible insignia, the mon, crest, of a recognized lord on your kimono or banners. This absence is as telling as the presence of swords. It signals you're unattached, a free agent, and therefore potentially dangerous or desperate. You learn to read the subtle cues of the street, the way a shopkeeper's eyes narrow when you pause too long outside his stall, the sudden silence that falls when you enter a cheap eatery, the way children, moments before shrieking with laughter, might fall quiet and scamper away. You are a disruption, a question mark. Encounters with the authorities are a constant source of anxiety. The local doshin, constables, or patrolling samurai from the city magistrate's office are always on the lookout for troublemakers. And Ronin, by definition, are potential troublemakers. They might stop you, question you. Your name? Your former master? Your business in this district? Your answers need to be careful, respectful, and ideally vague enough not to arouse further suspicion. Having no satisfactory answers could lead to detention, interrogation, or worse, especially if there's been recent unrest or a crime wave attributed to masterless samurai. Every official uniform you see in the distance is a potential threat. The city also offers temptations, snares for the unwary or the desperate. The entertainment districts, like Jian in Kyoto or Yoshiwara in Edo, though Yoshiwara was more of a licensed quarter, a world unto itself, glitter with false promises. Tea houses with charming hostesses, theaters showcasing kabuki, a relatively new and explosive art form, or puppet shows, bunraku, gambling dens hidden in back rooms. For a man with coin, these offer escape pleasure. For you, a Ronin with an empty purse, they are a bitter reminder of what you can't have. And if you do manage to scrape together a few coins, the temptation to lose yourself in a cup of sake or a risky game of chance can be overwhelming. A brief moment of oblivion, often followed by deeper despair and an even emptier pocket. Yet, the city is also a place of anonymity, which can be a double-edged sword. In a small village, everyone knows your business. Here, amidst the teeming thousands, you can disappear, to some extent. This allows you to eke out an existence on the fringes. But it also means that if you fall ill, if you get into trouble, there's no community to support you. You are truly alone. You learn the rhythms of your chosen slum. Which street vendor sells the cheapest, and probably stalest, rice balls? Which temple sometimes leaves out offerings that are still edible? Which bridge offers the best shelter from the rain without being already claimed by a tougher gang of vagrants? Your world shrinks to these gritty, essential details. The grand vistas of power and culture that the city offers to others are, for you, just a backdrop to your daily struggle for survival. The city can be a provider, a place of opportunity, however meager. But it's also a predator, ready to swallow the weak, the unlucky, the masterless. You walk its streets like a tightrope walker, one misstep away from a fatal plunge. And the safety net? It's made of holes. big ones. The echo in the hallway, encounters, and the art of invisibility. Imagine you're walking down a moderately busy street in Osaka, the great merchant city, its canals reflecting the gray sky. You're trying to look purposeful, as if you have somewhere important to be, even though your only real destination is not starving today. Suddenly, you see them. A group of 3 samurai, clearly in active service. Their kimonos are crisp, their hakama trousers immaculate, their swords polished and bearing the proud mon of a prominent local daimyo. They walk with an air of assurance, of belonging. What do? How does this encounter play out? This, my friend, is a masterclass in the delicate, often humiliating, dance of social interaction for a ronin. First, your internal alarm bells are clanging. These aren't just any samurai. They are employed samurai. They represent the system that has, in essence, spat you out. Your immediate instinct, honed by years of samurai training, might be to meet their gaze, to acknowledge them as fellow warriors. Bad idea. Very bad idea. As a ronin, you are in a social no man's land. To them, you are, at best, an object of pity or mild contempt. At worst, you're a potential troublemaker, a disgrace to the class, someone to be wary of. If you try to engage them as an equal, you risk being seen as presumptuous, arrogant even. Who does this masterless dog think he is? Might be the unspoken, or perhaps not so unspoken sentiment. So, the art of invisibility becomes your most practiced skill. As they approach, you subtly, almost imperceptibly, lower your gaze. Not in a servile, commoner-like bow, but enough to signal that you are not challenging their status, not seeking confrontation. You might shift slightly to the edge of the path, giving them the center. It's a delicate balance. You don't want to appear cowardly, but you absolutely want to avoid any incident. Remember, any altercation, even if you are technically in the right, could end very badly for you. They have a lord to back them up. You have your increasingly rusty swords and a whole lot of bad luck. If their eyes do happen to meet yours, a brief, neutral flicker is your best bet. No emotion, no challenge, no undue deference that might invite scorn. You want to be forgettable. A shadow, a smudge on the periphery of their well-ordered world. And what if they do address you? Perhaps a sneering young retainer, full of his own importance, decides to make a comment. Lost your way, wave man? Or, times are hard when even the dogs wear 2 swords, eh? Your blood might boil. The warrior pride, buried deep but not extinguished, screams for a retort, a defense of your honor. You clench your jaw. You breathe. You remember the price of outburst. A calm, non-committal grunt, a slight inclination of the head, and you keep moving. To engage is to escalate. To escalate is to risk everything for a moment of pointless defiance. Discretion in your current circumstances is far, far more valuable than valor. It's a bitter pill to swallow, a daily dose of humiliation that grinds away at your soul. Now, encounters with commoners, farmers, artisans, merchants. Here, the dynamic shifts, but it's no less complex. They will almost certainly show you outward signs of respect. The swords demand it. They will bow, step aside, use honorific language. But beneath the surface, fear certainly, perhaps a touch of pity, but also, sometimes, a shrewd calculation. A desperate ronin might be useful for a risky task. Or, conversely, a desperate ronin might be an easy target for a scam, or someone to be cheated in a transaction. You might try to buy some rice from a stall. The vendor bows calls you samurai-sama, but his eyes are sharp. He knows you're counting every coin. Will he give you fair measure? Or will he subtly short you, knowing you're unlikely to cause a scene that would draw official attention? You have to be constantly vigilant, but without appearing overly aggressive or suspicious, which could also backfire. It's exhausting. And what about other ronin? Surely there's solidarity among the masterless, a brotherhood of the dispossessed. Sometimes, perhaps, you might encounter other ronin in the cheap lodging houses, the sake dens, the forgotten corners of the city. There might be a shared understanding, a grim camaraderie born of similar circumstances. You might exchange information, whispers of a lord in a distant province who is rumored to be hiring, warnings about a particularly zealous city magistrate, tips on where to find a cheap meal. But equally, other ronin can be your fiercest competitors and gravest threats. If there's a rare opportunity for work, say, a merchant needs a few temporary guards, you'll be up against other desperate men, equally skilled, equally hungry. And some ronin, having abandoned all pretense of bushido, might see you as a target. Your swords, your meager possessions, even your life, could be at risk from those who have fallen further into the abyss. Trust is a rare and precious commodity, and you can't afford to misplace it. So, you move through this society like a ghost, trying to leave as faint an impression as possible. You learn to read the subtle currents of power and status in every interaction. You stifle your pride, curb your tongue, and pray that today is not the day that some arrogant fool or some unlucky chance drags you into a conflict you cannot win and cannot afford. The echo in the hallway of your former life is the sound of your own receding importance. Each encounter is a reminder of what you've lost and how little you now matter in the grand scheme of things. It's a lonely, precarious existence, lived on the knife edge of social acceptance and outright rejection. Dignity for a pittance. The morality of a mercenary meal. The hunger pangs are a relentless drumbeat. The shame of your situation is a constant, acrid taste in your mouth. Selling your ancestral wakizashi staved off starvation for a week, maybe two, but the coins are dwindling again, like water through cupped hands. That vague idea of becoming a wandering poet. Turns out, publishers aren't exactly lining up to print odes to an empty stomach, and begging with a flute just makes your lips sore and your spirit even more bruised. You need something more substantial. You need work that pays, even if it costs you a piece of what little dignity you have left. So, you start listening more intently to the whispers in the grimy tea houses, the furtive conversations in the fluff house you call home. And a name, or rather, a type, keeps cropping up. Kichibei the silk merchant is looking for able-bodied men for a journey south. Or old man Kenzo, who runs the gambling den in the flower district, needs some persuaders. This is where the rubber meets the road, where the abstract ideals of Bushido collide head-on with the brutal necessity of survival. Let's say you follow up on the Kichibei rumor. You find his sprawling shop a testament to his success. After a nervous wait, you're ushered into a back room. Kichibei is fat, prosperous, and eyes you with the cool appraisal of a man buying livestock. He doesn't care about your lineage, your sword school, or the honor of your ancestors. He cares about one thing. Can you protect his valuable silk shipment from bandits on the Takeda Road? And will you do it cheaply? He offers you a son. It's insulting. It's barely enough to cover your expenses and perhaps send a tiny amount back to your, hypothetical, increasingly desperate family. It's a fraction of what a samurai in active service would consider acceptable. But it's also more money than you've seen in months. You'd be a glorified caravan guard, taking orders from merchants and their head clerks, men you wouldn't have given the time of day in your former life. You'd be sleeping rough, eating basic rations, and facing the very real prospect of a bloody fight with desperate bandits who are, in many ways, just a more violent version of yourself. Do you take the job? Your stomach screams yes. Your samurai pride, battered and bruised as it is, whispers a hesitant no. This isn't glorious battle. This isn't service to a noble lord. This is guarding, cloth, for a man who probably views you as little more than a hired thug with a fancy sword. The contrast between your training, for honor, for glory, for death before dishonor, and the reality of this work is a chasm. But what's the alternative? Starvation? Selling your katana? That's a line you haven't crossed yet. So you swallow. You swallow your pride, your resentment, your disgust. You bow, perhaps a little too stiffly. I accept Kichibei dono. The dono, a respectful suffix, feels like ash in your mouth when addressing a merchant, but you say it. And so begins your life as a yojimbo, a hired sword. The work is grueling, often boring, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. You trudge alongside lumbering ox carts, scanning the tree line for any sign of ambush. Your fellow guards are a motley crew, other down on their luck ronin, some ex-ashigaru foot soldiers, perhaps even a few tough peasants who know how to handle a spear. The camaraderie, if any, is thin, based on shared misery rather than shared ideals. The merchants treat you with a mixture of fear and condescension. They need your sword arm, but they don't respect you. You are a tool, a weapon to be deployed. And if you get killed protecting their precious silks, well, they'll just hire another desperate ronin. You are, in their eyes, expendable. Or perhaps you didn't go for Kichibei. Perhaps the whispers led you to Kenzo's gambling den. This is an even murkier path. Kenzo doesn't want a guard, he wants an enforcer. He wants you to convince reluctant debtors to pay up. He wants you to stand menacingly in the corner while high-stakes games are played, a visible deterrent to cheaters or troublemakers. He might even want you to discourage rival gangs from encroaching on his territory. This isn't just about swallowing pride. This is about actively participating in the sordid, criminal underbelly of the city. Your sword, once a symbol of justice and order, at least in theory, now becomes an instrument of intimidation and extortion. You'd be using your hard-won martial skills to bully and threaten, often those who are themselves vulnerable or desperate. Each act would be another stain on your already tarnished honor. The pay might be better than Kichibei's, the sake more plentiful. But the cost to your soul, far, far higher. Can you do it? Can you look yourself in the mirror, if you had one, after roughing up some poor shopkeeper who fell behind on his gambling debts? Can you live with the knowledge that you've become little more than a well-armed gangster? Some Ronin did. Desperation is a powerful acid, capable of dissolving even the strongest principles. They rationalized it. I'm still using my skills. I'm providing for my family. The world has dealt me a bad hand. I'm just playing the cards I'm given. But the truth, the ugly, unvarnished truth, is that you're selling your martial prowess, your samurai heritage, for a mercenary meal. Each grain of rice bought with such earnings tastes a little like dirt. Each sip of sake fails to wash away the grime. You might tell yourself it's temporary, a means to an end. That one day you'll find a true master, regain your honor. But with each compromise, that dream fades a little further, becomes a little more transparent, like a ghost in the harsh light of day. This is the brutal calculus of survival for a Ronin. There are no clean choices. Only shades of gray, most of them leaning heavily towards black. And the question isn't just, can you do the job? It's, can you live with yourself afterwards? For many, the answer was a grim, resounding, I have to. Fleeting solace in a cracked cup, entertainment, escapism, and the echo of emptiness. Life can't be all grim determination and gnawing hunger, can it? Even for a destitute Ronin in 17th century Japan, surely there were moments of, well, if not joy, then at least distraction. A brief respite from the crushing weight of existence. Let's peer into the dim, smoky corners where a masterless samurai might seek a fleeting escape. But be warned, solace, like everything else in your current life, often comes with a price or leaves a bitter aftertaste. First, the obvious, sake. That beloved rice wine, Japan's liquid courage and comfort. If you've managed to earn a few coins, perhaps from that demeaning bodyguard job, or by pawning yet another small possession, the lure of a cheap sake shop can be almost irresistible. Imagine stepping out of the cold, damp alley into a small, crowded establishment. The air is thick with the smell of warm sake, cheap tobacco, and unwashed bodies. It's noisy, filled with the boisterous talk of laborers, struggling artisans, and yes, other men like yourself, Ronin, adrift and seeking oblivion in a cup. You find a space on a rough wooden bench. The proprietress, a shrewd-looking woman with seen-it-all eyes, brings you a small ceramic flask and a chipped cup. The sake is probably of dubious quality, harsh and fiery. But as it slides down your throat, it brings a fleeting warmth, a temporary dulling of the sharp edges of your reality. The hunger pangs recede a little. The shame of your worn kimono, the anxiety about tomorrow's meal, the ghosts of your past, they all seem to blur just for a moment. Here, in the anonymous camaraderie of shared drink, you might even strike up a conversation. Perhaps with another Ronin, exchanging tales of woe or exaggerated boasts of former glories. My master, Lord Abe, he once cut down 10 men with a single stroke. He probably didn't, but who's fact-checking in a dive bar? For a brief while, you can almost pretend you're still someone, still part of a world that values martial prowess and bold talk. But the escape is temporary, the sake wears off, the money runs out, and you're back in the cold, with a headache and an even emptier pocket. And that proprietress? She has a memory like a hawk for unpaid tabs. Gambling is another powerful temptation. Dice games, card games, Hanafuda was becoming popular, betting on cockfights, or even impromptu sumo matches in a temple courtyard. opportunities for a quick win and an even quicker loss were plentiful, especially in the less reputable corners of the city. The allure is obvious. The chance to turn a few meager coins into a substantial sum, enough to beat well for a week, perhaps even buy back that pawned wakizashi. You might find yourself in a dimly lit back room, the air thick with tension and tobacco smoke, huddled around a tatami mat where the dice are tumbling. Your heart pounds with each throw. A win. A small pile of coins is pushed your way. The adrenaline rush is intoxicating. You feel alive, powerful for a fleeting moment. But gambling is a cruel mistress. The odds are always stacked against you in a long run, especially in establishments run by professionals who know every trick in the book. More often than not, you'll walk away lighter than you came, the taste of defeat even more bitter than usual, perhaps with the added humiliation of having to borrow money from a less than savory lender at exorbitant interest. Another debt, another chain. What about more refined pursuits? You're a samurai after all. Even a down-at-heel one. Weren't you trained in the arts? Poetry, calligraphy, perhaps even the tea ceremony or flower arranging. Yes, you were. And these could offer a more profound, if less immediately gratifying, form of solace. Remember that thought about writing poetry because poets have fewer questions to ask? There's truth in that. In the quiet of your miserable rented room, if you have one, or perhaps sitting under a tree in a deserted temple garden, you might pull out a cheap brush and a scrap of paper if you can afford them. You could try to capture the melancholy beauty of a fading autumn leaf, the loneliness of the moon, the stark reality of your own existence in a 17-syllable haiku. Karida ni, on a withered branch. Karazu no tamarakuri, a crow has alighted. Aki no kyo, autumn evening. Basho himself, the great haiku master, was a contemporary wandering the land. Perhaps your own verses, born of hardship, could touch something true. There's a certain dignity in this, a quiet assertion of your spirit against the overwhelming tide of misfortune. Calligraphy, the art of beautiful writing, offers a similar meditative escape. The focused concentration, the flow of ink, the creation of something aesthetically pleasing, even if no one else ever sees it. These pursuits cost little, but they can feed the soul, if not the stomach. They are a reminder that you are more than just a failed warrior, more than your hunger and your shame. But even these refined solaces are tinged with the bitterness of your situation. Where would you get the money for good paper, for fine ink? Who would appreciate your poem or your calligraphy? Your former peers, the ones who might have shared these refined tastes, now shun you, and the common folk you rub shoulders with in the sake shop. They're more interested in the price of fish than the aesthetics of a well-turned phrase. The theater, kabuki with its dramatic tales and flamboyant actors, or bunraku puppet theater with its surprisingly moving stories, was a booming entertainment. But tickets cost money. You might occasionally catch a glimpse of a street performance, a juggler, an acrobat, a storyteller spinning tales for a few coins. These offer a brief moment of color and laughter in an otherwise gray existence. Ultimately, for many ronin, entertainment and solace were fleeting, often self-destructive, or deeply private and melancholic. The laughter in the sake shop rings hollow. The thrill of the gambling den quickly fades. Even the beauty of a poem is a stark contrast to the ugliness of your daily life. There's an echo of emptiness in every attempt to escape, a constant reminder of the secure, purposeful, and yes, often culturally rich life you have lost. The cracked cup of sake offers little comfort when your entire world feels broken. The law's long shadow and the weight of a single misstep. In the tightly controlled society of Tokugawa, Japan, the law wasn't just a set of rules. It was an omnipresent force, a shadow that stretched into every corner of life. For an ordinary citizen with a clear place in the hierarchy, a farmer tied to his land, an artisan in his guild, a merchant in his shop, the law, while often strict and unforgiving, provided a framework. For you, the ronin, a man without a place, the law was less a framework and more like a series of tripwires, an ever-present threat of entanglement that could lead to disaster. Why were the authorities so twitchy about ronin? We've touched on it. Peace was new, stability paramount. The Sengoku Jidai, that century of relentless civil war, was a fresh and terrifying memory. And who fought those wars? Samurai. Armies of them. A large population of masterless, skilled warriors, often impoverished and resentful, was seen by the shogunate and the various daimyo as a powder keg waiting for a spark. Think of the Kaiyan uprising in 1651, led by Ronin like Yui Shozetsu, a plot to overthrow the shogunate. It failed spectacularly, leading to brutal crackdowns, but it cemented the image of Ronin as inherently destabilizing. You, just by existing, were a statistical threat. So, what did this mean for you on a practical day-to-day level? It meant that drawing attention to yourself was generally a terrible idea. The local Machibugyo, town magistrate, and his constables, Doshin and Okapiki, the latter often being informants and general dogs buddies, had wide-ranging powers. They could detain, question, and punish with alarming swiftness, especially if the accused was someone without powerful connections. And you, my friend, are the poster boy for no powerful connections. Imagine you're involved in a minor street altercation. Perhaps someone bumps into you, insults are exchanged. If you are a samurai in good standing, part of a recognized lord's retinue, you might expect a certain degree of deference, even from the authorities. Your lord might intervene. But as a Ronin, you're automatically suspect. The assumption might be that you were the troublemaker. Even if you were entirely in the right, the situation could easily escalate against you. Witnesses might be reluctant to speak up for a masterless man. The constables, eager to maintain order and impress their superiors, might decide that making an example of a Ronin is the easiest way to resolve the situation. And punishment in Edo, Japan. Let's just say it wasn't a slap on the wrist and a stern talking to. For minor offenses, it could be a public flogging designed to humiliate as much as to hurt. For more serious crimes, or for repeat offenders, or simply if the magistrate was in a bad mood, things could get much worse. Banishment from the city or province. Imprisonment in horrific conditions. Dark, crowded, disease-ridden jails where survival itself was a challenge. And of course, execution. The methods of execution were varied and designed to be deterrents. Beheading was common. Crucifixion, often for particularly heinous crimes, or for those who defied authority, like bandits or rebels, was a slow and agonizing public spectacle. Even seppuku, the ritual suicide that was supposedly an honorable way out for a samurai, could be ordered under duress, effectively a death sentence cloaked in a veneer of warrior tradition. If you were deemed a particularly dangerous Ronin, or caught up in a suspected plot, you wouldn't be offered the privilege of a dignified exit. It would be swift, brutal, and public. Then there were the collective punishments. The Tokugawa regime was big on collective responsibility. If a crime was committed in a particular neighborhood or by a member of a certain group, the entire community or group could suffer the consequences. If a band of Ronin caused trouble, all Ronin in the area might come under increased scrutiny, facing curfews, random searches, or even preemptive arrests. You could be minding your own miserable business, trying to stay invisible, and suddenly find yourself rounded up because some other desperate souls decided to rob a temple. Fair? What's fair got to do with it? This is about control. Carrying your daisho was, as we've discussed, a mark of your former status, but it was also a constant reminder to the authorities of your potential for violence. In some areas, or during times of heightened tension, there might be restrictions on Ronin carrying weapons or requirements to register. Failure to comply. Trouble. Big trouble. And what if you actually used your sword? Even in self-defense. The legalities were murky and heavily weighted against you. Killing or injuring someone, even a commoner, could easily be construed as murder or assault by a masterless ruffian. You'd have to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your life was in immediate danger. And even then, the outcome was uncertain. He drew first. Might not be a convincing argument when you're a trained killer and the other guy was, say, a drunken peasant with a stick. So, you walk under this long shadow of the law every day. You learn to be hyper-aware of your surroundings, of who's watching. You avoid confrontations like the plague. You keep your head down. You try to melt into the background. Because one wrong step, one moment of rashness, one unlucky encounter with an overzealous constable, and your already precarious existence could come to a very abrupt, very unpleasant end. The legal system wasn't there to protect you. It was there to protect society from people like you. And that, my friend, is a terrifying realization to live with, day in and day out. The the cracks in the lacquer, Bushido, despair, and the will to go on Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code of conduct that supposedly guided every true samurai. Loyalty, courage, honor, self-discipline, sincerity, benevolence, to those deserving it, of course. These were the ideals drilled into you from childhood, polished like the lacquer on a fine scabbard, meant to be an unbreakable shield for your spirit. Now you're a Ronin. Your lord is dead, so loyalty has become an abstract, painful memory. Courage. It takes a certain kind of courage to face daily starvation and humiliation, but it's not the glorious battlefield valor of song and story. Self-discipline is hard to maintain when your stomach is a constant, howling void and your future is a blank wall. Sincerity? You're probably hiding your true desperation behind a carefully constructed mask of stoicism. Benevolence? Hard to practice when you can barely provide for yourself, let alone others. And honor? Honor. That's the big one. That's the ideal that's cracking under the strain, like old lacquer exposed to harsh weather. How do you maintain your honor when you're forced to contemplate selling your ancestral swords, the very symbols of that honor? How do you uphold it when you're taking demeaning jobs from merchants you despise, or worse, considering work that slides into the morally gray or outright criminal? The psychological toll of this internal conflict is immense. You are, in effect, at war with yourself. One part of you, the samurai part, clings desperately to the tenets of Bushido. It whispers of duty, of maintaining appearances, of enduring hardship with stoic dignity. It reminds you of your ancestors, of the proud lineage you represent. It might even tempt you with the honorable way out, seppuku, the promise of a small, hot meal. You join the throng around a flickering stall, your coins clutched tight. You watch as the vendor flips a pair of glistening sardines on a tiny grill. The sizzle, the smoke, the smell, it's almost intoxicating. He hands them to you, wrapped in a piece of rough paper, along with a meager bowl of rice. You find a quiet spot, perhaps on a low stone wall overlooking a murky canal, or in the relative anonymity of a temple precinct after the daytime crowds have dispersed. You eat slowly, savoring each mouthful. The fish is strong-flavored, a little bony, but it's hot, and it fills a space in your aching stomach. The rice is bland, but it's sustenance. This isn't the refined cuisine of your past, the multi-course meals served on delicate porcelain. This is survival, pure and simple. And in this moment, as the last light fades and the city's lanterns begin to glow like scattered fireflies, there might be a tiny, fragile sense of, not contentment, perhaps, but reprieve. You've made it through another day, you've eaten. For now, that's enough. But what if the day was bad? What if the jog fell through, if the pawn shop owner sneered at your offering, if your pockets are as empty as your prospects? Then that same smell of grilling fish becomes a torment. It's a reminder of what you don't have, a sharpening of your hunger, an underlining of your failure. You walk past those stalls, your stomach clenching, trying to ignore the aroma, trying to ignore the sight of others, laborers, street urchins, people you once considered far beneath you, enjoying their simple meal. The shame is a physical weight. The despair, a cold knot in your gut. The end of the day brings no real rest, only a temporary cessation of the active struggle. If you have that wretched room, you return to its familiar discomforts. If not, you seek out your patch of cold ground, your doorway, your bridge. The city's night sounds envelop you, the distant barking of dogs, the mournful cry of a noodle seller's flute, the occasional drunken shout, the eerie creak of wooden buildings settling in the cool air. And your mind? It doesn't switch off. It replays the day's humiliations, the missed opportunities, the close calls. It worries about tomorrow. Where will the next meal come from? Will that cough you've developed turn into something worse? Will the authorities finally decide you're too much trouble? Will you ever escape this grinding, soul-destroying existence? You might draw your remaining sword, your katana, your soul, and examine it in the faint moonlight or the flicker of a distant lantern. Is there new rust? Is the edge still keen? It's more than a weapon, it's your last connection to who you once were. Holding it, you might feel a flicker of the old pride, the samurai spirit. Or you might feel only the cold weight of its uselessness in your current life, the burden of its symbolism. Perhaps you try to meditate, to find that center of calm and discipline that your training was supposed to provide. But it's hard to find stillness when your body is weak with hunger and your mind is a hornet's nest of anxieties. The lofty philosophical concepts of Zen, the detachment from worldly suffering. They seem like distant, mocking echoes when suffering is your constant companion. Sleep, when it comes, is often fitful, populated by uneasy dreams. Dreams of your dead master, his face reproachful. Dreams of battles, of feasting, of a life that is now lost to you. You might wake with a start, disoriented, reaching for a sword that is, hopefully, still there, the familiar scent of damp earth or cheap tatami confirming your grim reality. The sunset smelling like fish isn't just about food. It's about the end of another day survived, another day endured. It's about the harsh, unromantic realities of poverty and marginalization. It's about the stripping away of illusions, leaving only the raw, pungent truth of your struggle. And as the darkness deepens, it brings with it the chilling certainty that tomorrow, the whole damn thing starts all over again. The sun will rise, and you, the Ronin, will have to face it with whatever dregs of strength and hope you can muster. Because what other choice do you truly have in this land where honor is easy to lose and a full belly is a victory in itself? The Unending Wave. Reflections from a shore of broken swords. So, there you have it. A glimpse, a taste, perhaps a rather bitter one, of what it might have been like to be a Ronin in 17th century Japan. Not the dashing, enigmatic swordsman of popular legend, but a man grappling with loss, poverty, social ostracism, and the slow, agonizing erosion of his identity. It's a far cry from cherry blossoms and perfectly composed Zen gardens, isn't it? More like damp alleys, cold rice, and the constant, gnawing fear of what tomorrow might bring or take away. What do we take from this journey into the shadows of the Edo period? If life has become an unbearable disgrace, if your honor is irrevocably compromised, then ritual suicide, a final, courageous act of self-immolation, might seem like the only fitting end. Many Ronin, unable to reconcile their ideals with their grim reality, did choose this path. A quiet, desperate end in a rented room or a lonely forest grove. But then there's another part of you. The human part. The part that screams for survival. The part that feels the gnawing hunger, the biting cold, the sting of humiliation. This part argues for pragmatism, for adaptation. Honor is a luxury for those with full bellies, it might hiss. Survival is the only true imperative. This part pushes you to take that demeaning job, to consider selling that sword, to do whatever it takes to see another sunrise. This internal struggle can lead to a profound senseka of despair, a deep, soul-crushing loneliness. Who can you talk to about this? Other Ronin might understand, but they're fighting their own battles. Commoners wouldn't comprehend the depth of your samurai angst. Employed samurai would likely just see your struggle as proof of your failure. You are utterly alone with your conflicting ideals and your crushing circumstances. The constant pressure to maintain a facade of samurai dignity, even in rags, is exhausting. You must still carry yourself with a certain bearing, speak with a certain formality when appropriate, even if inside you're crumbling. Any perceived weakness, any outward show of despair, could be exploited by others. So you build walls around your emotions, presenting a stony, unreadable face to the world. But behind that mask, the cracks are spreading. Some Ronin might find solace, or at least a temporary hardening, in cynicism. If the world has abandoned the ideals of honor and loyalty by casting you out, then why should you be bound by them? This can be a slippery slope, leading from pragmatic compromise to outright immorality. The man who starts by taking a bodyguard job for a merchant might end up as an enforcer for a Yakuza boss, telling himself that Bushido is dead anyway. Others might cling even more fiercely to the remnants of their code, finding a strange kind of nobility in suffering. They might endure unimaginable hardship, scrupulously avoiding any action they deem dishonorable, even if it means greater poverty and suffering. They become martyrs to a lost cause, their honor kept intact, pristine, but at a terrible personal cost. Perhaps they find a kind of peace in this, a purity in their refusal to compromise. Or perhaps they are simply too rigid to adapt, and their adherence to an unworkable code hastens their demise. And then there's the simple, animal will to live. Beyond honor, beyond despair, there is a fundamental human instinct to keep going, to endure. Maybe it's not for any grand ideal. Maybe it's just because the alternative is too terrifying, or because some tiny, stubborn spark of hope refuses to be extinguished. Perhaps you tell yourself, one more day. Just get through today. Tomorrow might be different. It rarely is, but the illusion can be enough to keep you putting one foot in front of the other. This psychological landscape is a battlefield as fierce as any you might have faced with your sword. The enemies are despair, shame, hunger, and the slow erosion of your very identity. The casualties are your ideals, your pride, sometimes your sanity. Surviving as a Ronin isn't just about finding food and shelter, it's about navigating this internal minefield, trying to find a reason to go on when every fiber of your being is telling you it's hopeless. The cracks in the lacquer of Bushido reveal the raw, vulnerable humanity beneath, and that humanity, in its desperate struggle, is perhaps more compelling than any idealized image of an invincible warrior. When the sunset smells like fish, a day ends, the struggle doesn't. The sun, a molten copper disk, begins its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange, purple, and blood red. It might be beautiful, a scene worthy of a poet's brush. But for you, our Ronin, the beauty is tinged with something far more prosaic, something that speaks directly to your weary bones and empty belly. As evening draws in, the air in the poorer districts of Kyoto, or the bustling warrens near the Nihonbashi fish market in Edo, becomes thick with a particular scent, the smell of grilling fish. Cheap fish, usually sardines or mackerel, cooked over charcoal braziers by street vendors or in cramped, smoky hovels. This is the smell of the sunset for many in your world. Not incense from a grand temple, not the perfume of a courtesan in Jian, but the oily, pungent aroma of the common man's evening meal. And for you, it's a potent symbol. If you've had a good day, perhaps you earned a few coins guarding Kichibe's dame silks, or maybe you managed to pawn a non-essential bit of clothing without too much heartache. That smell might be a promise. What does the plight of the Ronin tell us, centuries later, tuning in from our world of relative comfort and usually abundant choices? First, it's a stark reminder that history, unvarnished, is often a brutal and unforgiving affair. The grand narratives of unification, peace, and cultural flourishing, like the Tokugawa shogunate's long reign, always have an underbelly, a hidden cost paid by those who don't fit neatly into the new order. The Ronin were, in many ways, the collateral damage of peace. Men trained for war, suddenly finding themselves obsolete in a society that craved stability above all else. Their very existence was an inconvenient truth, a testament to the fact that societal shifts, even those deemed positive, rarely benefit everyone equally. It also throws into sharp relief the concept of honor. Bushido, with its lofty ideals, sounds noble in theory. But what happens when those ideals clash head-on with the basic human need for survival? Is honor something you can eat? Does it keep you warm at night? For the Ronin, these weren't abstract philosophical questions. They were daily, agonizing dilemmas. Selling a sword, taking a demeaning job, even begging. These were acts that would have been unthinkable for a samurai in good standing. Yet for a Ronin, they could mean the difference between life and death. It forces us to ask, is honor an absolute, or is it a luxury afforded by circumstance? And what is true strength? Rigid adherence to a code, or the adaptability to survive in a changed world, even if it means compromising that code? There are no easy answers then or now. The Ronin story is also a powerful illustration of the tyranny of social structure. In a world as rigidly hierarchical as Edo Japan, to lose your place, your master, your defined role, was to become almost subhuman in the eyes of many. You were a wave man, adrift and dangerous, precisely because you no longer fit. It highlights how much our sense of self, our security, our very worth, can be tied to external validation, to our position within a societal framework. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of our own modern identities are similarly constructed, similarly vulnerable to shifts in fortune or societal perception. And then there's the human dimension, the raw, personal struggle. The constant hunger, the cold, the fear, the shame, the loneliness. These are universal experiences, transcending time and culture. When we strip away the exotic trappings, the kimonos, the katanas, the unfamiliar customs, we find a human being facing unimaginable hardship, trying to make sense of a world that has rejected him, clinging to shreds of dignity and hope. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a sobering look at its breaking points. How much can a person endure before they snap or simply fade away? The dark humor, the sarcasm we might employ when looking back at such harsh realities? It's a coping mechanism, perhaps. A way to process the sheer, unadulterated awfulness of it all. Because if you don't laugh, sometimes you might just weep at the casual cruelty, the systemic injustice, the sheer bad luck that could define a life. Phrases like social suicide or ghosts with jobs might sound flippant, but they capture a kernel of truth about the precariousness and absurdity of the Ronin's plight. Ultimately, the story of the Ronin is not just about Japan or the 17th century or samurai. It's about what happens when the world changes and leaves you behind. It's about the conflict between ideals and reality, between identity and survival. It's about the immense pressure of societal expectation and the crushing weight of its absence. So, the next time you see a romanticized image of a lone, wandering samurai silhouetted against a full moon, remember our friend. Remember the cold rice porridge, the agonizing decision about the second sword, the smell of cheap fish at sunset. Remember the constant, grinding struggle, not for glory, but for one more mouthful of rice, one more night's shelter, one more day of precarious existence. Because that, my friends, is the unvarnished truth, and it's a truth that, in its own grim way, is far more compelling, far more human than any legend. The waves of time wash over us all, but the echoes of those who struggled against the tide, those wave men of the past, still have much to teach us about the enduring and often brutal business of being human. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I suddenly have a craving for, well, maybe not fish, not tonight. All right, you thought the sunset smelling like fish was the end of the story? Oh, bless your optimistic heart. That was just one day. Survival isn't a single dramatic act. It's a relentless, grinding marathon run on an empty stomach, with shame as your pacer and despair cheering from the sidelines. We've peeled back a few layers, but the onion of Ronin misery has many, many more. So, stoke that imaginary fire, pour another cup of imaginary, and hopefully better quality sake, because we're diving deeper. The water's colder down here, and the things that bite have sharper teeth. The unseen scars, family, shame, and the hunger of little mouths. We've focused on your plight, our solitary Ronin, wrestling with your swords and your soul. But what if you weren't alone in this? What if the greatest weight on your shoulders wasn't the daisho, but the hungry eyes of a wife and children looking to you, their samurai, their protector, for sustenance you can no longer reliably provide? Imagine Akane, your wife. She came from a modest samurai family herself, perhaps. Her marriage to you arranged when your future seemed bright, your master's favor secure. She was trained in the womanly arts, yes, managing a household, perhaps some calligraphy, the tea ceremony. Skills that were valuable in a samurai household, but about as useful as a chocolate teapot in your current hovel. Now, her fine kimono, the one she brought as part of her dowry, is patched and faded. Her hands, once soft, are raw from scrubbing laundry for a pittance, or from the endless, thankless task of trying to keep your shared, squalid room, if you can even call it that, from succumbing entirely to filth. When you return from a fruitless day of searching for work, or from a demeaning job that barely bought enough rice for one, how do you meet her gaze? Her silence can be heavier than any accusation. Does she reproach you? Rarely, perhaps. Samurai women were also trained in endurance, in stoicism. But you see the worry etched around her eyes, the thinness of her face, the way she gives the largest share of any meager meal to your children, Taro and Hana, often going without herself. And the children. Taro, your son, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. Old enough to remember, vaguely, a better life. A life with more food, warmer clothes, a father who held his head higher. Now he sees you, his samurai father, often returning empty-handed, his face grim. How do you explain to him why he can't have a sweet rice cake from the street vendor? How do you teach him the pride of the samurai class when your own pride is in tatters, when the very swords that symbolize that pride might be the next thing you have to sell to feed him? He's too young to understand the complexities of feudal politics, of confiscated domains, or the economics of peace. He just knows he's hungry. Hannah, your daughter, younger, perhaps clinging to a cane's worn sleeve. Her cough, a small, persistent rattle, tears at your heart. You know she needs better food, warmer shelter. But what can you do? The shame of not being able to provide, not just for yourself, but for these innocent lives entrusted to you, is a corrosive acid eating away at your soul. It's a different kind of torment than the loss of personal honor. It's the agony of a protector who has failed. Akani might try to help. Desperate, she might seek work. But what work is there for the wife of a disgraced Ronin? Mending clothes for neighbors hardly better off than yourselves? Working as a servant in a merchant's household, facing potential exploitation and the contempt of those who know her husband's status. The risks are enormous. A lone woman, especially one associated with a masterless samurai, is vulnerable. Every time she leaves your hovel, a new anxiety gnaws at you. The social stigma extends to them. Other children might taunt Taro and Hannah. Neighbors might whisper. Your family becomes an extension of your disgrace. This isn't just about your survival anymore. It's about theirs, and that pressure can drive a man to even greater extremes. That offer from One-Eyed Jiro and his gang of Ronin thugs, the one you recoiled from. It might look different when Hannah's cough gets worse, when Taro's ribs start to show more sharply. The moral compromises become harder to resist when they're not just about your own stomach, but about the lives of those you love. Sometimes, in the dead of night, you might wake to the sound of Akani quietly weeping. She tries to stifle it, but you hear. And in those moments, the weight of your swords, the abstract concepts of Bushido, they seem so utterly, crushingly irrelevant compared to the raw, human pain filling your tiny shared space. The unseen scars of your Ronin life are etched deepest on the hearts of your family. The crawling things, disease, filth, and the body's betrayal. We've talked about hunger, but let's not forget its equally grim companions, disease and the sheer, grinding filth of poverty in a pre-modern city. Your samurai training emphasized physical fitness, endurance. You could march for days, fight for hours. But that training is little defense against the invisible enemies that teem in the slums. Hygiene? What hygiene? Clean water is a luxury. You might draw it from a communal well, shared by hundreds, its purity questionable. Bathing. Public bathhouses, sento, exist, but they cost money. Money you don't have. So you make do with a quick splash from a bucket if you're lucky. More often, it's just a wipe with a damp rag. Your clothes, rarely washed, become stiff with grime and sweat. And with the grime come the crawling things. Lice are a constant, itchy affliction. Fleas too, especially if your shelter is shared with stray animals or is simply an abandoned, vermin-infested structure. Food, when you get it, is often of dubious quality. Leftovers scavenged from markets, grains that are slightly moldy, fish that's a day or two past its prime. Your stomach, accustomed to this abuse, might handle it. Or it might not. Dysentery, the flux, is a common killer, especially in the hot, humid summers when bacteria thrive. It leaves you weak, dehydrated, and utterly miserable. And there are no antibiotics, no IV drips. You either recover through sheer bodily resilience or you don't. That persistent cough we mentioned for little Hannah. It could be anything. A simple cold, yes. But it could also be the early signs of tuberculosis, the white plague, rampant in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Or pneumonia, or whooping cough. Childhood diseases that modern medicine handles with relative ease were often death sentences, and watching your child sicken, weaken, without being able to afford even the most basic herbal remedies from an apothecary, whose effectiveness was often debatable anyway, is a unique and terrible form of torture. Medical care for a Ronin. Forget the esteemed physicians who attended to daimyo and wealthy merchants. Your options are slim to none. Perhaps a local barber surgeon whose skills might extend to lancing a boil or setting a simple fracture, badly, but little else. Or a wandering monk selling talismans and prayers, which might offer spiritual comfort but do little for a raging fever. More likely, it's folk remedies, whispered advice from equally impoverished neighbors, or simply enduring the illness and hoping for the best. The streets themselves are a hazard. Open sewers or just gutters running with refuse are common. Animal droppings, rotting food, human waste, it all contributes to a miasma of disease. smallpox, measles, influenza, these sweep through cities in devastating epidemics, and the poor, with their compromised immune systems and crowded living conditions, are always the hardest hit. You might survive a sword fight, only to be laid low by a fever you caught from contaminated water. There's no glory in that, is there? Just a slow, miserable decline. Even minor injuries, a cut from a rusty nail while scavenging for firewood, a scrape that gets infected, can become life-threatening. Without proper cleaning, without antiseptics, infection is a constant danger. You might watch a small wound on your hand turn red, swell, throb with pus, your arm aching, fever setting in. And you know, with a cold dread, that this small thing could be what finally kills you. Your body, once your finely honed instrument of war, betrays you, succumbing not to a worthy opponent's blade, but to the invisible, insidious enemies of poverty. It's a slow, undignified unraveling, a world away from the clean death of seppuku or the swift end in battle. The shifting sands of the underworld, Ronin gangs, crime, and the allure of a darker path. The constant pressure, the hunger, the despair, it can warp a man. It can make him consider things he would have once found unthinkable. We've touched on the morally grey area of bodyguard work, or even enforcing debts for a gambler. But what happens when even those options dry up or prove insufficient? What if the only hand reaching out to you is calloused, scared, and decidedly criminal? The cities of Edo, Japan, for all the Tokugawa regime's efforts at control, had a thriving underworld. Bakuto, gamblers, and takiya, peddlers, often dealing in stolen or shady goods, were forming into what would eventually become the Yakuza. These groups needed muscle. They needed men who knew how to handle themselves, men who weren't afraid of violence, and who fits that description better than a desperate, skilled Ronin. Imagine you're at your absolute lowest. You haven't eaten a proper meal in days. Akane is sick. Taro's shoes have fallen apart. You're sitting outside a dilapidated temple, trying to summon the will to beg, when a man approaches. He's not a samurai, but he carries himself with a certain swagger. Perhaps he has a few crude tattoos visible on his arm. He recognizes the look in your eyes. He's seen it before. He makes you an offer, not a job guarding silks, something less public. His group needs an extra sword for a dispute with a rival gang over territory in the local market. Or perhaps they're planning to liberate some goods from a wealthy merchant's warehouse. The pay is good, he assures you. More than you'd make in a month of honest or semi-honest toil. And there's food, and sake, and a sense of belonging, of power, however illicit. This is a critical crossroads. The remnants of your Bushido scream in protest. This is banditry thuggery. This is the antithesis of everything a samurai is supposed to stand for. But your stomach, and the image of your starving family, scream louder. Some Ronin crossed this line. They joined these nascent criminal organizations. They became the enforcers, the hired killers, the muscle behind illegal enterprises. They might have rationalized it. The world has abandoned me, so I abandon its rules. At least here, my skills are valued. I'm still a warrior, just fighting a different kind of war. If you join such a group, your life changes again. You might eat more regularly, have a few coins in your pocket. You might even gain a twisted kind of respect, born of fear, within that criminal subculture. But you also descend deeper into a world of violence, betrayal, and constant danger, not just from rival gangs, but from the authorities who are always cracking down or trying to on organized crime. Your sword, once a symbol of honor, now becomes a tool of terror. You might find yourself intimidating innocent shopkeepers for protection money, engaging in brutal street brawls, perhaps even taking a life in a back alley ambush. The camaraderie within such a gang is often false, built on shifting loyalties and mutual self-interest. Betrayal is common. A slip-up, a perceived weakness, and you could find yourself on the wrong end of your erstwhile comrades' blades. And if caught by the authorities, there's no pretense of an honorable end. It's torture, a gruesome execution, your head displayed on a spike as a warning to others. Alternatively, some Ronin, particularly those who found themselves in remote, poorly policed areas, might form their own bandit gangs, preying on travelers on lonely mountain roads, raiding isolated villages for food and valuables. This was an even more direct path to outlaw status. It was a life of constant flight, of hiding in forests and caves, of paranoia and brutality. But for some, driven to the absolute brink, it might have seemed like the only option left. They became the wolves they were once sworn to protect the sheep from. This descent isn't usually a sudden plunge, but a slow slide, each compromise making the next one easier. It starts with a hungry stomach, a sick child, a moment of weakness, and it can end with you becoming a feared outlaw, a man with a price on his head, your samurai past a mocking, distant memory. The shifting sands of the underworld offered a treacherous path, one that promised survival, but often delivered only a faster route to a dishonorable grave. The seasons of despair, time's slow erosion and the fading echo of hope. A single day in the life of a Ronin is grim enough, but imagine that day stretching into weeks, months, then years. Time, which heals some wounds, only deepens others for the masterless samurai. The initial shock of losing your master, the frantic scramble for immediate survival, eventually gives way to a dull, chronic ache, a persistent, low-grade despair that becomes the new normal. How do the changing seasons affect your struggle? Spring might bring a fleeting, deceptive hope. The weather warms, nature awakens. Perhaps there's more agricultural work available for a short period, though it's backbreaking and ill-suited to your skills. The festivals and vibrancy of spring in the cities might just highlight your own exclusion, your inability to participate in the joy. The plum blossoms, once a symbol of samurai spirit and renewal, might now seem like a cruel mockery. Summer is often oppressive. The heat and humidity in the crowded cities breed disease. Food spoils quickly. Tempers fray easily. If you're sleeping rough, the nights offer little relief from the sweltering days. Insects are a torment. The seasonal rains can turn your meager shelter into a mud pit, your thin clothing perpetually damp. Autumn brings a temporary reprieve from the heat, but also the melancholy of decay. The days shorten. The nights grow colder. The harvest might mean a temporary abundance of food in the markets, but it also signals the approach of winter, a season to be dreaded. You watch the leaves fall, and perhaps see a metaphor for your own declining fortunes, your own fading vitality. Winter. Winter is the true test, the crucible. The cold is a relentless enemy. If you lack proper shelter, warm clothing, and fuel for a fire, it can be lethal. Food becomes scarcer and more expensive. The streets are often icy and treacherous. The weak, the old, and the very young are particularly vulnerable. You see more sickness, more death. The fight for survival becomes even more desperate, more brutal. Huddling in a doorway, wrapped in every scrap of cloth you possess, shivering uncontrollably, you might wonder if you'll even see the spring. This is when the will to live is tested to its absolute limit. Over time, the sharp edges of your samurai pride might get worn down by the constant friction of poverty and humiliation. The meticulous care of your swords, it becomes harder to maintain when you can't afford oil or powder, when your hands are stiff with cold or trembling from hunger. The upright posture, the dignified bearing. It's hard to sustain when your body is racked with hunger and your spirit is broken. Hope, that stubborn little ember, begins to fade. The dream of finding a new master, of regaining your status, recedes further with each passing year, each closed door, each fresh indignity. You see other Ronin who have been on this path longer than you. Some have become listless shadows, shuffling through the streets, their eyes vacant. Others have grown bitter and cruel, their desperation hardening into a dangerous cynicism. A few might have found a strange kind of peace, a resignation, carving out a tiny, almost invisible niche for themselves, perhaps as a lowly temple attendant, a street performer, or a teacher of basic literacy to children in some forgotten slum. Your own aspirations shrink. No longer do you dream of glory or high office. Now you dream of a full rice bowl, a roof that doesn't leak, a day without fear or shame. The grand ideals of Bushido might still echo faintly in the recesses of your mind, but they are increasingly drowned out by the more immediate, primal demands of your body and the relentless grind of your circumstances. What happens to your skills? Your swordsmanship, once your pride and purpose, might grow rusty from disuse, or from lack of proper practice space and partners. Or, if you found work as a bodyguard or enforcer, it might be honed to a razor-sharp, purely functional deadliness, stripped of its art and philosophy. Your knowledge of literature, of poetry. it becomes a private, bittersweet solace, or perhaps a source of frustration at its uselessness in your current life. The passage of time also means watching your children grow up in poverty, their opportunities stunted by your status. It means seeing your wife age prematurely, worn down by hardship and worry. These are the slow, accumulating wounds, the ones that don't kill you quickly but bleed you dry over years. Does anyone escape this? Occasionally, perhaps. A rare stroke of luck, a chance encounter, a sudden shift in political fortunes might offer a lifeline to a fortunate few. Some ronin were re-employed during periods of unrest, or when a daimyo needed to quickly expand his forces. Some might have found patronage through an unexpected connection. But for the vast majority, the path of the ronin was a one-way street leading to a slow decline, an anonymous death, and a forgotten grave. The ending isn't a blaze of glory, it's more often a quiet fade into the grim backdrop of urban poverty, another nameless casualty of a changing world. The philosopher in rags, finding meaning or not in the gutter. Amidst this relentless struggle for physical survival, what happens to the ronin's inner world, his mind, his spirit? Samurai were often literate, educated not just in martial arts, but also in Confucian classics, Zen Buddhism, poetry, and history. Does this intellectual and spiritual baggage become a comfort, a burden, or something else entirely in the face of abject poverty? Imagine yourself huddled in a freezing, leaky shed you share with 3 other desperate souls, a single flickering candle casting dancing shadows on the grime-caked walls. You haven't eaten properly in 2 days. Your kimono is little more than rags. And yet, in your mind, you might be reciting lines from the Chinese poets Du Fu or Li Bai, their verses on hardship and exile suddenly taking on a visceral, personal meaning. Or perhaps you contemplate a Zen koan, a paradoxical riddle designed to break down conventional thinking. What is the sound of one hand clapping? In your current state, the answer might just be the growl of an empty stomach. For some, this intellectual heritage could be a source of profound solace. The Confucian emphasis on endurance, on maintaining righteousness even in adversity, might provide a moral compass, a reason to resist the slide into criminality or utter despair. The Zen concept of impermanence, mujo, could offer a strange kind of comfort. If all things are transient, then perhaps even this suffering will eventually pass. Meditation, even in the most squalid conditions, could offer moments of mental clarity, a temporary detachment from the misery of the body. You might find a quiet corner in a temple garden, not to beg, but to simply sit, to breathe, to try and find a center of stillness amidst the chaos of your life. You might even try to use your literacy. Perhaps you offer to write letters for illiterate commoners for a few coins. A love letter, a business contract, a petition to a local official. It's a pittance, but it's a way to use a skill that sets you apart, a small assertion of your former status and education. You could become the slum's impromptu scribe, your brushstrokes forming characters that carry the hopes and sorrows of others, a brief distraction from your own. However, this intellectual and spiritual background could also be a source of immense frustration, even torment. What use is your knowledge of battlefield strategy when you're fighting for scraps of food with feral dogs? What comfort is there in quoting classical poetry when your children are crying from hunger? The ideals you were taught, honor, loyalty, service, might seem like a cruel joke in the face of your current reality. Your education might simply make you more acutely aware of what you've lost, of the vast gulf between the life you were prepared for and the life you are now forced to live. This could lead to a deep cynicism, a rejection of the varied philosophies that once sustained you. What did Confucius know of an empty belly? You might snarl internally. What did the Buddha know of a landlord demanding rent you don't have? You might see the elaborate rituals of the wealthy temples, the serene faces of the well-fed monks, and feel nothing but bitterness and resentment. Their spiritual platitudes sound hollow when your reality is so relentlessly physically harsh. Some ronin might engage in endless, circular philosophical debates with their equally destitute companions in cheapsake dens, dissecting the reasons for their fall, the nature of fate, the meaninglessness of it all. Fueled by cheap alcohol and shared misery, these discussions might offer a temporary intellectual outlet, but they rarely lead to any practical solutions. They are the musings of men with too much time and too little hope, ghosts with jobs trying to philosophize their way out of a material hell. And then there's the simple, brutal fact that prolonged hunger and stress dull the mind. It's hard to think clearly, to concentrate, to find solace in abstract thought when your body is screaming for its basic needs. The philosopher in rags might eventually become just rags, his lofty thoughts lost in the fog of malnutrition and exhaustion. Yet, even in the deepest degradation, the human spark for meaning can persist. Some Ronin, stripped of everything, might find a new, unexpected kind of enlightenment, not the serene detachment of a Zen master, but a raw, unvarnished understanding of the human condition at its most elemental. They might develop a profound empathy for other sufferers, a dark wisdom born of shared hardship. They might find beauty in the smallest, most unexpected things. A single wildflower pushing through a crack in a dirty alleyway, an act of kindness from another unfortunate, the resilience of a child's laughter in the face of adversity. The Ronin's journey is not just a physical one through the mean streets of Edo, Japan, but an internal one through the landscapes of his own mind and soul. Whether his intellectual and spiritual heritage proves to be a life raft, an anchor, or simply irrelevant baggage depends entirely on the individual, the specific circumstances, and the sheer, unpredictable cruelty or kindness of fate. But the struggle to find meaning, even in the gutter, is a testament to the enduring complexity of the human spirit, even when clad in the tattered robes of a masterless samurai. The sun finally dips below the horizon, and the fish vendors are packing up. Another day is done. You, our Ronin, are still here. Perhaps a little hungrier, a little colder, a little more worn down, but still here. And as the darkness of another uncertain night envelops you, you know, with a grim certainty that tomorrow the struggle will begin anew. Because for a Ronin, the wave never truly breaks, it just keeps rolling on, and you, the wave man, must somehow find a way to stay afloat. All right, you thought the sunset smelling like fish was the end of the story. Oh, bless your optimistic heart. That was just one day. Survival isn't a single dramatic act. It's a relentless, grinding marathon run on an empty stomach, with shame as your pacer and despair cheering from the sidelines. We've peeled back a few layers, but the onion of Ronin misery has many, many more. So stoke that imaginary fire, pour another cup of imaginary, and hopefully better quality sake, because we're diving deeper. The water's colder down here, and the things that bite have sharper teeth. We've walked the tightrope of social encounters, felt the gnawing hunger, debated selling our very soul for a bowl of rice, and wrestled with the ghosts of Bushido in a world that seems to have forgotten its meaning. But the journey of a wave man is long, and the currents pull in many directions, most of them towards jagged rocks. The unseen scars, family, shame, and the hunger of little mouths. We've focused on your plight, our solitary Ronin, wrestling with your swords and your soul. But what if you weren't alone in this? What if the greatest weight on your shoulders wasn't the daisho, but the hungry eyes of a wife and children looking to you, their samurai, their protector, for sustenance you can no longer reliably provide? Imagine Akane, your wife. She came from a modest samurai family herself, perhaps. Her marriage to you arranged when your future seemed bright, your master's favor secure. She was trained in the womanly arts, yes, managing a household, perhaps some calligraphy, the tea ceremony. Skills that were valuable in a samurai household, but about as useful as a chocolate teapot in your current hovel. Now, her fine kimono, the one she brought as part of her dowry, is patched and faded. Her hands, once soft, are raw from scrubbing laundry for a pittance, or from the endless, thankless task of trying to keep your shared, squalid room, if you can even call it that, from succumbing entirely to filth. The delicate scent of plum blossom she once favored is long gone, replaced by the smell of wood smoke, cheap soap, and the faint, ever-present odor of poverty. When you return from a fruitless day of searching for work, or from a demeaning job that barely bought enough rice for one, how do you meet her gaze? Her silence can be heavier than any accusation. Does she reproach you? Rarely, perhaps. Samurai women were also trained in endurance, in stoicism. But you see the worry etched around her eyes, the thinness of her face, the way she gives the largest share of any meager meal to your children, Taro and Hannah, often going without herself. You see her turn away sometimes, a quick, almost imperceptible movement to hide a tear or a sigh that might further burden you. The shared hardship creates a bond, yes, but also a terrible unspoken strain. You, who swore to protect and provide, feel like a failure in the most fundamental sense. And the children. Taro, your son, perhaps 6 or 7 years old enough to remember, vaguely, a better life. A life with more food, warmer clothes, a father who held his head higher, who taught him the first stances with a wooden sword in a sunlit courtyard. Now he sees you, his samurai father, often returning empty-handed, your face grim, your shoulders slumped. How do you explain to him why he can't have a sweet rice cake from the street vendor when other children do? How do you teach him the pride of the samurai class, the importance of kiri, duty, and makoto, sincerity, when your own pride is in tatters, when the very swords that symbolize that pride might be the next thing you have to sell to feed him? He's too young to understand the complexities of feudal politics, of confiscated domains, or the economics of peace. He just knows he's hungry. He sees the fear in his mother's eyes, and it reflects in his own. His questions become fewer, his laughter more subdued. The spark in his eyes, the one you once cherished, is dimming. Hana, your daughter, younger, perhaps clinging to a cane's one sleeve, her small face pale. Her cough, a small persistent rattle, tears at your heart like a blunt saw. You know she needs better food, warmer shelter, perhaps some expensive herbs from the apothecary. But what can you do? The shame of not being able to provide, not just for yourself, but for these innocent lives entrusted to you, is a corrosive acid eating away at your soul. It's a different kind of torment than the loss of personal honor. It's the agony of a protector who has failed. Every cough is an accusation. Every whimper of hunger is a fresh stab of guilt. Akane might try to help, her samurai spirit refusing to simply surrender. Desperate, she might seek work. But what work is there for the wife of a disgraced ronin in a society that strictly defined women's roles, especially those of the samurai class? Mending clothes for neighbors hardly better off than yourselves. Taking in laundry, her hands chapped and bleeding from the harsh lay. Perhaps, if truly desperate, working as a servant in a merchant's household, facing potential exploitation and the contempt of those who know her husband's status. The risks are enormous. A lone woman, especially one associated with a masterless samurai, is vulnerable. Every time she leaves your hovel, a new anxiety gnaws at you. Will she be safe? Will she be humiliated? Will she return with enough for a single meal? The social stigma extends to them like a contagion. Other children, sensing their parents' disdain for the fallen samurai family, might taunt Taro and Hana, excluding them from their games. Neighbors might whisper, their pity mixed with scorn and fear. Look at them, the family of the wave man, best to keep our distance. Your family becomes an extension of your disgrace. This isn't just about your survival anymore, it's about theirs. And that pressure can drive a man to even greater extremes. That offer from One-Eyed Juro and his gang of Ronin thugs. The one you recoiled from, your samurai sensibilities outraged. It might look different when Hana's cough gets worse, when Taro's ribs start to show more sharply, when Akane faints from hunger while trying to scrub a wealthy family's kimonos. The moral compromises become harder to resist when they're not just about your own stomach, but about the lives of those you love. The question shifts from, can I live with myself, to, can I live with myself if they die because of my pride? Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city finally quiets to a low hum, you might wake to the sound of Akane quietly weeping. She tries to stifle it into her thin bedding, but you hear. And in those moments, the weight of your swords, the abstract concepts of Bushido, the epic poems of heroism and loyalty, they seem so utterly, crushingly irrelevant compared to the raw, human pain filling your tiny shared space. The unseen scars of your Ronin life are etched deepest on the hearts of your family, a daily silent testament to your fall. And you, the samurai, the warrior, can do nothing to staunch that bleeding. The crawling things, disease, filth, and the body's betrayal. We've talked about hunger, but let's not forget its equally grim companions, disease and the sheer, grinding filth of poverty in a pre-modern city. Your samurai training emphasized physical fitness, endurance. You could march for days, fight for hours, withstand pain. But that training, that iron discipline of the body, is little defense against the invisible enemies that teem in the slums, the miasmas that rise from the open drains, the microscopic terrors that lurk in contaminated water and spoiled food. Hygiene? What hygiene when your home is a corner of a packed tenement or a leaky lean-to against a city wall? Clean water is a luxury. You might draw it from a communal well, shared by hundreds, its purity questionable, often brackish or fouled. The effort to haul it, to boil it, if you even have fuel for a fire, is immense. Bathing. Public bathhouses, Cento, exist, offering a blessed escape into warmth and cleanliness, but they cost money. Money you don't have. So you make do with a quick splash from a bucket if you're lucky. More often, it's just a wipe with a damp, increasingly fetid rag. Your clothes, rarely washed, become stiff with grime, sweat, and the general detritus of the streets. And with the grime come the crawling things. Lice are a constant, itchy affliction, a maddening torment that denies you even the solace of undisturbed sleep. Fleas too, especially if your shelter is shared with stray animals or is simply an abandoned, vermin-infested structure. You scratch, you burn, you endure. Food, when you get it, is often of dubious quality. Leftovers scavenged from markets after the vendors have packed up, bruised fruit, wilting vegetables, grains that are slightly moldy, fish that's a day or two past its prime and carries the faint, sweetish scent of decay. Your stomach, accustomed to this abuse, might handle it for a while. Or it might not. Dysentery, the flux, with its debilitating cramps, bloody diarrhea, and relentless dehydration, is a common killer, especially in the hot, humid summers when bacteria thrive. It leaves you weak, hollowed out, and utterly miserable. And there are no antibiotics, no IV drips, no electrolyte solutions. You either recover through sheer bodily resilience and luck, or you don't. You watch, helpless, as your own strength, or that of your wife or children, ebbs away. That persistent cough we mentioned for little Hannah, it could be anything. A simple cold, yes. But in these conditions, it could also be the early signs of tuberculosis, the white plague, rogi, rampant in crowded, unsanitary conditions, slowly consuming its victims from within. Or pneumonia, turning every breath into a fiery struggle. Or whooping cough, racking a small body with paroxysms that seem to tear it apart. Childhood diseases that modern medicine handles with relative ease were often death sentences. And watching your child sicken, weaken, without being able to afford even the most basic herbal remedies from an apothecary, whose effectiveness was often debatable anyway, a mixture of genuine botanical knowledge and pure quackery, is a unique and terrible form of torture. You might trade your last valuable possession, not for food, but for a useless powder or a bitter infusion, clinging to a desperate, futile hope. Medical care for a run-in. Forget the esteemed physicians who attended to daimyo and wealthy merchants, with their intricate theories of humors and pulses, their carefully guarded herbal formulas. Your options are slim to none. Perhaps a local barber surgeon, whose skills might extend to lancing a boil, pulling a rotten tooth, with pliers, no anesthetic, or setting a simple fracture, badly, often leading to a lifetime of pain or a crippled limb, but little else. Or a wandering monk, a yamabushi perhaps, selling talismans, paper charms, ofuda, and prayers, which might offer spiritual comfort or a placebo effect, but do little for a raging fever or a festering wound. More likely, it's folk remedies, whispered advice from equally impoverished neighbors, a poultice of dubious herbs, a ritual chant, an offering to a minor deity. Or simply enduring the illness, hoping for the best, and preparing for the worst. The streets themselves are a hazard. Open sewers or just gutters running with refuse are common. Animal droppings, rotting food, human waste, it all contributes to a miasma of disease, a palpable stench that hangs heavy in the air, especially in the poorer districts. Smallpox, with its horrific scarring and high mortality rate, measles, influenza, these sweep through cities in devastating epidemics, and the poor, with their compromised immune systems and crowded living conditions, are always the hardest hit, their bodies piling up for the hinin to collect. You might survive a sword fight, a bandit attack, the perils of a mercenary job, only to be laid low by a fever you caught from contaminated water or a bite from an infected rat. There's no glory in that, is there? Just a slow, undignified, anonymous decline. Even minor injuries, a cut from a rusty nail while scavenging for firewood, a scrape that gets infected from the ever-present filth, can become life-threatening. Without proper cleaning, without antiseptics, which didn't exist in the modern sense, infection is a constant danger. You might watch a small wound on your hand turn red, swell, throb with pus, red streaks tracing paths up your arm, fever setting in. And you know, with a cold dread, that this small thing, this trivial injury, could be what finally kills you. Your body, once your finely honed instrument of war, your trusted ally, betrays you, succumbing not to a worthy opponent's blade in honorable combat, but to the invisible, insidious enemies of poverty. It's a slow, undignified unraveling, a world away from the clean death of seppuku or the swift end in battle. It's the body itself becoming another source of shame and despair. The shifting sands of the underworld, running gangs, crime, and the allure of a darker path. The constant pressure, the hunger, the despair, the sight of your family suffering, it can warp a man. It can make him consider things he would have once found unthinkable, actions that would have made his ancestors spin in their graves. We've touched on the morally grey area of bodyguard work for merchants, or even enforcing debts for a gambling den proprietor. But what happens when even those options dry up, or prove insufficient to keep the wolves of starvation and disease from your door? What if the only hand reaching out to you is calloused, scarred, tattooed, and decidedly criminal? The cities of Edo, Japan, for all the Tokugawa regime's relentless efforts at control and order, had a thriving, shadowy underworld. Bakuto, professional gamblers, often running illegal dens and engaging in loan sharking, and takiya, itinerant peddlers, frequently dealing in stolen, counterfeit, or shoddy goods, and often enforcing their own territories with violence, were forming into what would eventually coalesce into the Yakuza. These groups, operating on the fringes of society, needed muscle. They needed men who knew how to handle themselves in a fight, men who weren't afraid of violence, men who could intimidate and enforce. And who fits that description better than a desperate, skilled ronin, a man whose sword arm is his only remaining asset? Imagine you're at your absolute lowest. You haven't eaten a proper meal in days. Akane is sick, her racking cough a constant reminder of your failure. Taro's shoes have fallen apart, his bare feet raw from the cold, rough streets. You're sitting outside a dilapidated temple, the shame of begging a palpable weight when a man approaches. He's not a samurai, his kimono is flashy but cheap, but he carries himself with a certain brutal swagger. Perhaps he has a few crude, bluish tattoos, a carp, a demon mask, visible on his arm or chest where his kimono gapes. He recognizes the look in your eyes, that hollowed-out desperation. He's seen it before, on countless other broken men. He makes you an offer, his voice low and conspiratorial. Not a job guarding silks on the Tokaido. Something less public, more direct. His group, the Sleeping Dragon Gang, or some such colorful name, needs an extra sword for a dispute with a rival gang over territory in a local market. Or perhaps they're planning to liberate some goods from a wealthy and notoriously cruel monelender's warehouse. The pay is good, he assures you, with a sleek grin that doesn't reach his cold eyes. More than you'd make in a month of honest, or semi-honest, toil. And there's food, and sake, and a sense of belonging, of power, however illicit. He might even appeal to your twisted sense of justice. This monolender, he bleeds the poor dry. We're just redistributing the wealth, samurai-san. This is a critical crossroads, a precipice. The remnants of your bushido, the teachings of your sensei, the image of your honorable ancestors all scream in protest. This is banditry, thuggery, extortion. This is the antithesis of everything a samurai is supposed to stand for, protecting the weak, upholding justice, even if it was often the justice of your lord. But your stomach, the image of your starving family, the sound of Hannah's weakening cough, they scream louder, a more primal, urgent demand. Some ronin crossed this line. They had to. They joined these nascent criminal organizations. They became the enforcers, the hired killers, the muscle behind illegal enterprises. They might have rationalized it. The world has abandoned me, so I abandon its rules. At least here, my skills are valued, my sword respected. I'm still a warrior, just fighting a different kind of war, for a different kind of lord. Or perhaps they didn't rationalize it at all. They simply surrendered to the grim necessity, the darkness a perverse comfort after the constant struggle to maintain an impossible purity. If you join such a group, your life changes again dramatically. You might eat more regularly, have a few coins in your pocket for sake or a warm bath. You might even gain a twisted kind of respect, born of fear, within that criminal subculture. Your swords, once a symbol of a lost status, now become tools of a new terrifying trade. But you also descend deeper into a world of violence, betrayal, and constant danger, not just from rival gangs, but from the ever-watchful eyes of the shogunate's officials who were always cracking down, or trying to, on organized crime, especially if it grew too bold or threatened public order too overtly. Your sword, once wielded in disciplined forms, now tastes blood in chaotic back-alley brawls, in sudden brutal ambushes. You might find yourself intimidating innocent shopkeepers for protection money, breaking the legs of a gambling debtor, guarding an illegal dice game, or even taking a life in a squalid turf war over a few worthless streets. Each act is another layer of grime on your soul, another step away from the man you once were or believed yourself to be. The camaraderie within such a gang is often false, a fragile bond built on shifting loyalties and mutual self-interest. Betrayal is common, expected. A slip-up, a perceived weakness, a rumor that you're talking to the authorities, and you could find yourself on the wrong end of your erstwhile comrade's blades, your body dumped in a canal or a forgotten refused pit, and if caught by the city magistrate. There's no pretense of an honorable end, no offer of seppuku. It's torture in the city jail to extract information about your gang, followed by a gruesome public execution, perhaps crucifixion or beheading, your head displayed on a spike at the city limits as a stark warning to others who might contemplate a similar path. Alternatively, some ronin, particularly those who found themselves in remote, poorly policed rural areas, might form their own independent bandit gangs, preying on travelers on lonely mountain roads, raiding isolated, poorly defended villages for food, valuables, and sometimes, tragically, for women. This was an even more direct and brutal path to outlaw status. It was a life of constant flight, of hiding in forests and caves, of paranoia and brutality, a regression to a primal, animalistic existence. But for some, driven to the absolute brink, seeing no other way to feed themselves or their desperate followers, it might have seemed like the only option left. They became the wolves they were once sworn to protect the sheep from, their samurai ideals a hollow, mocking echo in the howl of the wind. This descent isn't usually a sudden plunge, but a slow slide, each compromise making the next one easier. It starts with a hungry stomach, a sick child, a moment of weakness. And it can end with you becoming a feared outlaw, a man with a price on his head, your samurai past a mocking, distant memory, your name whispered with fear and hatred. The shifting sands of the underworld offered a treacherous path, one that promised survival, but often delivered only a faster route to a dishonorable grave, your final moments filled not with noble thoughts, but with terror and regret. The seasons of despair, time's slow erosion, and the fading echo of hope. A single day in the life of a ronin is grim enough, a testament to endurance. But imagine that day stretching into weeks, then months, then years. Time, which heals some wounds, only deepens others for the masterless samurai. The initial shock of losing your master, the frantic scramble for immediate survival, the desperate hope of finding a new lord, eventually gives way to a dull, chronic ache, a persistent, low-grade despair that becomes the new, unwelcome wallpaper of your existence. It's the slow drip of water that eventually wears away stone. How do the changing seasons, each with its own character, affect your struggle, your dwindling reserves of resilience? Spring in Japan is a time of breathtaking beauty, of renewal, of cherry blossoms, sakura, painting the landscape in delicate hues of pink and white. For you, it might bring a fleeting, deceptive hope. The weather warms, making life on the streets, or in your flimsy hovel, marginally less unbearable. Perhaps there's a brief surge in agricultural work available for a short period, planting rice, back-breaking, mud-caked labor, ill-suited to your skills, and deeply humiliating for a former samurai, but offering a few precious coins. The festivals and vibrancy of spring in the cities, however, might just highlight your own exclusion, your inability to participate in the communal joy. The sight of families picnicking under the blossoms, their laughter echoing, can be a sharp stab of pain. The plum blossoms, once a symbol of samurai spirit and perseverance, might now seem like a cruel mockery of your own withered prospects. Summer arrives, often with oppressive, suffocating heat and humidity, especially in the crowded, poorly ventilated cities. This is the season when disease thrives. Food spoils quickly if not eaten immediately. Tempers fray easily in the relentless heat, leading to more frequent brawls and altercations in the slums. If you're sleeping rough, the nights offer little relief from the sweltering days. Mosquitoes and other biting insects are a constant torment, their bites often becoming infected. The seasonal rains, that suiyu or plum rain, can turn your meager shelter into a mud pit, your thin clothing perpetually damp and mildewed, chilling you to the bone despite the heat. Each day is a struggle just to breathe, to move, to escape the crushing lethargy. Autumn brings a temporary reprieve from the intense heat, and often a stunning display of color as the maple leaves turn crimson and gold. But it also carries a deep melancholy, a sense of decay and approaching hardship. The days shorten. The nights grow colder, a chilling premonition of what's to come. The harvest might mean a temporary abundance of food in the markets, a brief dip in prices, but it also signals the relentless approach of winter, a season to be dreaded by the poor and homeless. You watch the leaves fall from the trees, and perhaps see a potent metaphor for your own declining fortunes, your own fading vitality, your hopes scattering like dead leaves in the wind. There's a beauty, yes, but it's a dying beauty. Winter. Winter is the true test, the crucible, the season that separates the merely desperate from the truly doomed. The cold is a relentless, insidious enemy. If you lack proper shelter, warm clothing, and fuel for a fire, charcoal being a precious commodity, it can be lethal. Food becomes scarcer and more expensive as travel becomes difficult and stores dwindle. The streets are often icy and treacherous. The weak, the old, and the very young are particularly vulnerable. You see more sickness, more death in the slums during winter. The fight for survival becomes even more desperate, more brutal. A sheltered doorway, a discarded straw mat, a share of a meager fire. These become objects of fierce competition. Huddling in a doorway, wrapped in every scrap of cloth you possess, your limbs numb, your breath misting in the frigid air, shivering uncontrollably, you might genuinely wonder if you'll even see the spring. This is when the will to live is tested to its absolute limit, when the temptation to simply lie down and let the cold claim you can be overwhelming. Over time, the sharp edges of your samurai pride, that fierce sense of self-worth, might get worn down by the constant friction of poverty, humiliation, and the sheer indifference of the world. The meticulous care of your swords. It becomes harder to maintain when you can't afford oil or powder, when your hands are stiff with cold or trembling from hunger, when the very act of polishing them seems like a pointless charade. The upright posture, the dignified bearing you were trained to exhibit. It's hard to sustain when your body is racked with hunger and chilled to the marrow, when your spirit is broken. You might start to slouch, to shuffle, your eyes downcast, a mirror of the defeated commoners you once pitied. Hope, that stubborn little ember that flickered in the early days, begins to fade, choked by the ashes of countless disappointments. The dream of finding a new master, of regaining your status, of restoring your family's honor, recedes further with each passing year, each closed gate, each dismissive glance, each fresh indignity. You see other Ronin who have been on this path longer than you. Some have become listless shadows, shuffling through the streets with vacant eyes, muttering to themselves, their minds unhinged by years of suffering. Others have grown bitter and cruel, their desperation hardening into a dangerous cynicism, preying on those even weaker than themselves. A few, a very few, might have found a strange kind of peace, a hard-won resignation, carving out a tiny, almost invisible niche for themselves, perhaps as a lowly temple attendant sweeping leaves, a street performer with a single mournful song, or a teacher of basic literacy to the slum children, sharing what little knowledge they have left. Your own aspirations shrink, contracting like a dying star. No longer do you dream of glory on the battlefield or high office in a lord's court. Now you dream of a full rice bowl every day, a roof that doesn't leak, a night without knowing hunger or shivering cold, a day without fear or shame. The grand ideals of Bushido, loyalty, honor, courage, might still echo faintly in the recesses of your mind, like a half-forgotten song from a distant childhood, but they are increasingly drowned out by the more immediate, primal demands of your body and the relentless, grinding machinery of your circumstances. What happens to your hard-won skills? Your swordsmanship, once your pride and purpose, the art to which you dedicated years of your life, might grow rusty from disuse, your muscles atrophying, your reflexes dulling. Or, if you found work as a bodyguard or enforcer, it might be honed to a razor-sharp, purely functional deadliness, stripped of its art, its philosophy, its spiritual depth, becoming nothing more than a brutal tool for survival or crime. Your knowledge of literature, of poetry, of the tea ceremony? It becomes a private, bittersweet solace, a reminder of a more refined self that no longer seems to exist, or perhaps a source of intense frustration at its utter uselessness in your current life. What good are elegant couplets when your children cry for food? You might think. The passage of time also means watching your children grow up in poverty, their opportunities stunted by your status, their childhoods stolen by hardship. It means seeing your wife age prematurely, her beauty and vitality worn down by endless toil and worry. These are the slow, accumulating wounds, the ones that don't kill you quickly but bleed you dry over years, hollowing you out from the inside. Does anyone escape this? Does any Ronin truly break free from this downward spiral? Occasionally, perhaps. A 1 in a million chance. A rare stroke of incredible luck, a chance encounter with a sympathetic or opportunistic individual, a sudden, unexpected shift in political fortunes might offer a lifeline to a fortunate few. Some Ronin were re-employed during periods of rare unrest, or when a daimyo needed to quickly expand his forces for some specific purpose and was willing to overlook a man's past. Some might have found patronage through an unexpected connection, perhaps an old comrade in arms who had fared better, or a merchant who saw a unique talent. But for the vast majority, the path of the Ronin was a one-way street leading to a slow decline, an anonymous death in some forgotten alley or squalid fluffhouse, and an unmarked grave, if they were lucky enough to get a grave at all. The ending isn't usually a blaze of glory, a dramatic last stand. It's more often a quiet fade into the grim backdrop of urban poverty, another nameless, forgotten casualty of a changing world. The philosopher in rags, finding meaning, or not, in the gutter. Amidst this relentless, all-consuming struggle for physical survival, what happens to the Ronin's inner world, his mind, his spirit? Samurai, particularly those of higher rank or from more established families, were often literate, educated not just in martial arts, but also in Confucian classics, Zen Buddhism, poetry, history, and even calligraphy. Does this intellectual and spiritual baggage become a comfort in adversity, a heavy burden, or something else entirely when you're scrabbling for existence in the gutter? Imagine yourself how Ronin, huddled in a freezing, leaky shed you share with 3 other desperate, lice-ridden souls, the only light a single sputtering, stolen candle casting long, dancing, macabre shadows on the grime-caked walls. You haven't eaten properly in 2 days. Your kimono, once a garment of pride, is little more than rags, offering scant protection against the biting wind that whistles through the cracks. And yet, in your mind, you might be reciting lines from the Chinese Tang Dynasty poets Du Fu or Li Bai, their verses on hardship, exile, and the transience of glory suddenly taking on a visceral, painfully personal meaning. Or perhaps you contemplate a Zen koan, one of those paradoxical riddles designed to break down conventional thinking and lead to enlightenment. What is the sound of one hand clapping? In your current state, the immediate, unbidden answer echoing in your skull might just be the persistent, painful growl of an empty stomach, or the chattering of your own teeth. For some, this intellectual heritage, this training of the mind, could be a source of profound solace, a last refuge. The Confucian emphasis on endurance, on maintaining righteousness, jai, and self-respect, even in the direst adversity, might provide a moral compass, a reason to resist the slide into criminality or utter despair. The idea of the superior man, Zhenzi, who remains steadfast in his principles regardless of fortune, could be a powerful, if difficult, ideal to cling to. The Zen concept of impermanence, Muzhou, the understanding that all things, including suffering, are transient, could offer a strange, detached kind of comfort if all things are constantly changing, then perhaps even this seemingly endless suffering will eventually pass, or at least transform. Meditation, even practiced in the most squalid conditions, amidst the noise and stench of the slums, could offer fleeting moments of mental clarity, a temporary detachment from the misery of the body, a quiet space within the storm. You might find a quiet corner in a deserted temple garden, not to beg, but to simply sit, to breathe, to try and find that elusive center of stillness amidst the chaos of your life. You might even try to use your literacy, your education, in small, desperate ways. Perhaps you offer to write letters for illiterate commoners for a few coins. A love letter from a shy young man to a girl he dared not approach. A business contract for a small stallholder. A petition to a local official from a widow seeking redress for some injustice. It's a pittance, barely enough for a handful of rice, but it's a way to use a skill that sets you apart. A small assertion of your former status and education. A brief moment of feeling useful, of feeling like more than just a burden. You could become the slum's impromptu scribe, your brushstrokes, though perhaps hesitant now from disuse or a trembling hand, forming characters that carry the hopes, sorrows, and mundane concerns of others, a brief distraction from the weight of your own. However, this intellectual and spiritual background could also be a source of immense frustration, even torment. What use is your knowledge of Sun Tzu's art of war, your understanding of complex battlefield strategy, when you're fighting for scraps of discarded food with feral dogs in a refuse heap? What comfort is there in quoting the elegant verses of classical poetry when your children are crying from hunger, their bellies swollen from malnutrition? The very ideals you were taught, honor, loyalty, service, self-sacrifice for your Lord, might seem like a cruel, elaborate joke in the face of your current reality. Your education might simply make you more acutely, painfully aware of what you've lost, of the vast, unbridgeable gulf between the life you were prepared for and the life you are now forced to live. It can amplify the bitterness, sharpen the sting of your fall. This could lead to a deep, corrosive cynicism, a rejection of the very philosophies that once sustained you, seeing them as empty words, tools of the powerful to keep the unfortunate in their place. What did Confucius know of an empty belly that gnaws day and night? You might snarl internally. What did the Buddha, who renounced a prince's life, truly understand about a landlord demanding rent you don't have, threatening to throw your sick family out into the snow? You might see the elaborate rituals of the wealthy temples, the serene, well-fed faces of the high-ranking monks, and feel nothing but bitterness and resentment. Their spiritual platitudes about detachment and acceptance sound hollow, even insulting, when your reality is so relentlessly, physically harsh and unjust. Some ronin, those with a more scholarly or argumentative bent, might engage in endless, circular philosophical debates with their equally destitute companions in cheap, smoky-sake dens, fueled by bad liquor and shared misery. They might dissect the reasons for their fall, the nature of fate versus free will, the inherent injustice of the social order, the meaning or meaninglessness of it all. These discussions might offer a temporary intellectual outlet, a way to feel like their minds are still active, but they rarely lead to any practical solutions or genuine comfort. They are the musings of men with too much time on their hands and too little hope in their hearts, ghosts with jobs trying to philosophize their way out of a material hell, their arguments often dissolving into drunken recriminations or maudlin self-pity. And then there's the simple, brutal physiological fact that prolonged hunger, chronic stress, and persistent pain dull the mind. It's hard to think clearly, to concentrate on complex ideas, to find solace in abstract thought when your body is screaming for its most basic needs, when every nerve ending is frayed. The philosopher in rags might eventually, tragically, become just rags. His lofty thoughts, his knowledge of the classics, his spiritual aspirations, all lost in the fog of malnutrition, exhaustion, and encroaching dementia. The light of reason flickers and dies, leaving only the primal urge to survive or the blessed relief of oblivion. Yet, even in the deepest degradation, the human spark for meaning, for connection, for something beyond the purely animalistic, can persist in unexpected ways. Some ronin, stripped of everything, status, wealth, family, even their own self-respect, might find a new, unexpected kind of enlightenment. Not the serene, transcendent detachment of a Zen master in a pristine monastery, but a raw, unvarnished, gut-level understanding of the human condition at its most elemental. They might develop a profound, unsentimental empathy for other sufferers, a dark, hard-won wisdom, born of shared hardship and the stripping away of all illusions. They might find a strange, stark beauty in the smallest, most unexpected things. A single tenacious wildflower pushing its way through a crack in a dirty alleyway. An unsolicited act of kindness from another unfortunate soul. A shared crust of bread, a moment of shared silence that speaks volumes. The astonishing resilience of a child's laughter in the face of adversity. The Ronin's journey is not just a physical one through the mean streets and back alleys of Edo, Japan, but an equally tortuous internal one through the landscapes of his own mind and soul. Whether his intellectual and spiritual heritage proves to be a life raft, helping him navigate the storm, an anchor, dragging him down into bitterness and despair, or simply irrelevant baggage, depends entirely on the individual, the specific twists and turns of his circumstances, and the sheer, unpredictable cruelty or kindness of fate. But the struggle to find meaning, or to endure its absence, even in the gutter, is a testament to the enduring, often tragic, complexity of the human spirit, even when that spirit is clad in the tattered, lice-infested robes of a masterless samurai. The basket on the head. The world of the we've mentioned begging, the shame of it, perhaps with a flute. But for some Ronin, this desperate act could transform, taking on a semblance of structure, even a perverse kind of legitimacy, by entering the shadowy world of the komuso, the priests of nothingness or empty monks. These were mendicant players of the shakuhachi, a bambooed flute, ostensibly members of the Fuke sect of Zen Buddhism, a sect whose historical authenticity and religious sincerity were, shall we say, often as murky as the back alleys they frequented. Imagine the moment of decision. You've tried everything else. Your swords are gathering rust. Your pride is a raw, open wound. The thought of outright begging as yourself, as a failed samurai, is unbearable. But then you hear of the komuso. They wander, they play the flute, they receive alms. And crucially, they wear the tengai, a distinctive, deep, woven basket-like hat that completely covers their face, rendering them anonymous. Anonymity. What a seductive concept for a man whose very identity has become a source of shame and danger. To become a komuso wasn't always as simple as just picking up a flute and a basket. In theory, one was initiated into the Fuke sect. In practice, especially during periods when Ronin numbers swelled, the lines blurred. Some temples claiming Fuke affiliation might have been little more than Ronin refuges, offering a thin veneer of religious legitimacy in exchange for a share of the alms or a willingness to perform certain services. The Fuke sect itself claimed certain privileges, including freedom of travel, a significant boon in the tightly controlled Tokugawa society, and immunity from the interference of local authorities, though these privileges were often contested and depended heavily on the sect's current standing with the shogunate. For a Ronin, this potential immunity was a powerful lure. So, you acquire a shakuhachi. Perhaps you had some rudimentary skill from your samurai education, or perhaps you learn now, your fingers, more accustomed to the hilt of a sword, fumbling with the finger holes. The melodies are often mournful, meditative, supposedly conducive to Zen enlightenment, suizen or blowing Zen. You don the tengai, looking out at the world through the loose weave of the basket. Everything is muted, obscured. But equally, you are obscured. You are no longer Maeda Kenji, former retainer of the disgraced Lord Sato. You are simply a komuso, a nameless, faceless monk. Is it liberation or another form of imprisonment? Your daily life becomes a ritual of wandering. You walk the streets, your posture perhaps still retaining a hint of samurai discipline, but your purpose now reduced to soliciting alms. You stand before houses, shops, at temple gates, and play. The haunting, breathy notes of the shakuhachi float on the air. Some passers-by ignore you. Some toss a few coins into your alms bowl out of pity, religious duty, or simply to make you go away. Some, perhaps other samurai or those who appreciate the austere aesthetics of Zen, might listen intently, offering a more generous donation. Each coin is a small victory against starvation. The shakuhachi itself is more than just an instrument. Legend and Fuke doctrine held that it could also be a weapon, the hokiku or dharma bamboo. Its length and sturdiness meant it could be used as a club in self-defense, a last resort for a monk who was, in theory, committed to non-violence but who, in reality, was often a desperate man navigating dangerous streets. Did you practice with it as such, the muscle memory of your sword training adapting to this new, humbler tool? But this life is not without its own perils and contradictions. Other beggars, not part of your sect, might see you as competition, leading to territorial disputes. The authorities, despite the Fugue sect's supposed privileges, are often suspicious. Is this Komuso a genuine monk, or just another masterless samurai in disguise, using the basket hat to evade scrutiny, perhaps even to spy or cause trouble? There were, undoubtedly, many of the latter. You might be harassed, questioned, your tengai forcibly removed, your true identity exposed. And what of your samurai pride, now hidden beneath a basket? Does it wither and die, or does it fester, fueling a silent, impotent rage at this final humiliation? Playing a mournful tune for a few scraps, your warrior spirit caged within a monk's guise, it's a bitter pill. You might encounter other Komuso. Some are genuine seekers of enlightenment, finding a profound spiritual path in the discipline of Suizan and the anonymity of the Tengai. Others are like you, ronin clinging to a marginal existence, their flute playing a means to an end, their piety a convenient fiction. There might be a grim camaraderie among these empty monks, a shared understanding of their precarious position. But trust is, as always, a rare commodity. The Fugue sect itself was a strange entity, sometimes patronized by the shogunate, who found it useful to have a network of wandering monks who could also serve as informants, at other times suppressed. Its fortunes waxed and waned, and with it, the safety and privileges of its adherents. You are tied to this shifting, uncertain institution. Living as a Komuso is a life of profound liminality. You are neither truly layman nor fully ordained priest in the eyes of many. You are a samurai who is no longer a samurai. You are visible yet unseen, public yet anonymous. You trade the overt shame of the identifiable ronin for the veiled ambiguity of the basket-headed monk. Is it a step up or just a different circle of hell? The answer probably depends on how well you play the flute, how much compassion you encounter, and how effectively that woven basket shields you not just from the eyes of the world, but from the sharp edges of your own despair. A flea-bitten lion, the aging ronin, and the specter of utter irrelevance. Time, as we've seen, is not the ronin's friend. The seasons turn, years pass, and the man who was once a proud warrior in his prime inevitably begins to age. What happens when the strength that was his primary currency, the skill with the sword that was his defining characteristic, begins to wane? The ronin, if he survives long enough, faces a new terrifying enemy, his own failing body, and the looming specter of utter irrelevance in a world that already considers him a burden. Imagine yourself now, not as the desperate but still physically capable man of our earlier encounters, but as someone who has endured perhaps 20 or 30 years of this grinding existence. Your hair, if you still have much, is streaked with gray, or perhaps entirely white. Your back, once straight and strong from years of martial discipline, is now permanently stooped from hardship, malnutrition, and the simple weight of years. Your joints, knees, elbows, shoulders, ache with a persistent, dull throb, especially in the cold, damp weather. Arthritis, the unwelcome companion of age and a hard life, has set in. Your eyesight, once keen enough to spot the glint of an enemy's blade at 50 paces, is now clouded. The world is a blurrier, less certain place. Reading, if you still had the inclination or the materials, becomes a struggle. Recognizing faces at a distance is difficult. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a direct threat to your survival. How can you spot danger or a potential opportunity if you can't see clearly? Your reflexes, once lightning fast, have slowed. The intricate kata of your sword school, if you even attempt them anymore, are performed with a painful stiffness, a shadow of their former grace and power. Drawing your sword, which used to be a single fluid motion, now feels clumsy, hesitant. The thought of engaging in actual combat, even if your life depended on it, fills you not with the warrior's adrenaline, but with a cold, realistic dread. You are no longer a credible threat, and you know it. This physical decline has immediate, practical consequences for your career options, meager as they were. Bodyguard work? who once an aging, slow-moving guard with failing eyesight. Even Kichibei the silk merchant would laugh you out of his shop. Enforcer for a gambling den, you're more likely to be the one getting roughed up. Teaching swordsmanship in a dojo, your own lack of current prowess would be painfully obvious. You might still possess the knowledge, the theory, but without the physical demonstration, who would pay to learn from a broken-down old man? You become increasingly vulnerable. To illness, certainly, as your aging body's defenses weaken. A simple cold can now easily turn into pneumonia. A fall on an icy street can result in a broken hip, a death sentence for someone without care or resources. You are also more vulnerable to attack. The younger, stronger ruffians in the slums, who might have given you a wide berth when you were in your prime, now see you as an easy target for your meager possessions, for a bit of cruel sport, or simply to oust you from a sheltered doorway. Your swords, if you still carry them, might be more of a liability than a defense, an invitation to trouble you can no longer handle. The psychological impact of this decline can be devastating. For a man whose entire identity was once tied to his physical strength and martial skill, aging can feel like a final, ultimate betrayal by his own body. Despair can deepen into a profound, hopeless apathy. Or it can curdle into a bitter, resentful rage at the world, at your own failing flesh, at the young and strong who still possess what you have lost. You might become that stereotypical querulous, foul-tempered old man, lashing out at everyone, trusted by no one. If you have a family, if a Cain has somehow survived alongside you, if your children are still alive and haven't abandoned you, your dependence on them becomes almost total. This can be a source of immense shame for a man raised to be a provider and protector. You are now the burden. A Cain, herself aged and worn, might be struggling to care for you both. Your son Taro, if he's managed to find some precarious employment, might resent the drain on his own meager resources. The love and duty that once bound your family can be severely tested by the relentless pressures of poverty and your growing infirmity. If you are alone, as many aging Ronin undoubtedly were, your isolation becomes absolute. Who will bring you a bowl of rice when you are too sick to leave your mat? Who will help you if you fall? You are truly at the mercy of chance and the occasional fleeting kindness of strangers, which becomes rarer as you become more decrepit and less sympathetic looking. Your world shrinks. Your wanderings, if you can still manage them, are confined to a smaller and smaller area. You spend more time simply sitting or lying down, lost in memories and regrets. The past, with its lost glories and bitter disappointments, can become more real than the bleak present. You might replay old battles in your mind, remember the faces of comrades long dead, the taste of victory, the sting of your master's downfall. These memories can be a comfort or a fresh source of pain. What if you had made different choices? What if fate had been kinder? These are the unanswerable questions that haunt the long, empty hours of an aging, forgotten Ronin. Is there any dignity left? Perhaps some might find a quiet resignation and acceptance of their fate. They might focus on small things, the warmth of the sun on a winter's day, a shared joke with another old unfortunate, the taste of a piece of fruit given in charity. They might even attain a kind of weary wisdom, having seen so much of life's harshness, so much of human folly and resilience. The flea-bitten old lion, no longer capable of hunting, might still possess a certain battered majesty, a quiet endurance that commands a grudging respect. Your story, once potentially epic, dwindles to a pathetic footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in the slums, if anyone remembers to tell it at all. The sunset, which once smelled of fish and fleeting sustenance, now just smells of decay.